Kamon, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. It's we've been talking about doing this for over a year. We're just now finally getting around to it.
We sure have. We've talked quite a bit on the phone, and it's just great to get you on here finally and be able to chat for a little while. I'm really excited about it. And first of all, I think everyone on here knows who you are, probably. But if you could just kind of briefly share a story with us about how you got started in beekeeping and kind of what drove you to kind of put you to the next level with this hive life movement that you've created, you and Laurel and some of your other, I guess Ian's been involved and Bob and some other
Hmm.
people. Kind of, if you could take a couple of minutes or however long you need to kind of explain that to us, and so we have a better idea of what your story is.
Okay, that sure thing. And you're involved in that movement too. There's a lot of people involved in it, and that's why it's working. So, getting to how I got started, I'll keep it short. But when I first recognized honeybees as something that was kind of odd and different was when I was a kid. I think I was 8 years old, and I remember I went to a museum, and I always have loved that kind of stuff. But on a huge wall, they had these hexagon cells, and there was pictures of larvae and honey and pollen and different things in the cell and different ages of developing bees. And I remember being slightly freaked out originally by that because it looked like it was alien, and they were large too. I mean, the cells were big enough for probably a 2-year old to stand up in, and at 8, you could lay down in the cells, and they actually let you do those kind of things. And that was my first exposure to honeybees right there. And then my next experience that I can remember was trying some honey from the store, and it was gross. And I was thinking, I don't know why in the world anybody would eat this stuff. My next experience, I went on a camping trip with my dad to Fall Creek Falls, Tennessee, where they still have a large observation hive. And then I actually got to see some live bees in action. And that really, it's like, wow, this is crazy that you can actually see this many insects, and they're doing all the things that they're doing. And then from there, it was about a year later, and a gentleman who kept bees, about 14, 12 hives somewhere in there, he was at a place I was playing a bluegrass show at, and also helping them do sorghum and different things. And I've always liked that old fashioned stuff. And he had a small observation hive there and two types of honey and talked to me about bees. And after that, I got bees within 2 months. I purchased 5 hives. Terrible idea because I got them in October. Bad time of the year to get bees. I lost 4 out of 5 just because I didn't know what I was doing. I had no mentor or anything. I grabbed a book, but I remember opening a hive for the first time and questioning my sanity for even beginning to do this. That roar of the bees, which now I'm very used to. So that was how I originally got into bees, and I was 14 when I got my first hives, and within a month I turned 15, and I haven't looked back. I'm 33 now. We got had a lot of other things going on. I say we, it was primarily myself at a farmer's market, raised a bunch of chickens, but I wanted honeybees because I've always liked to, even since I was a little kid, I've always wanted to sell things. I always have wanted to be outdoors. So that kind of, I wanted those two things to merge where I could have a business and be outdoors. And honeybees and gardening was the answer. But the honeybees was just way cooler than the gardening. I do love both, though. I was actually gardening about 20 minutes before I got on. And so I got those hives, and it was year after year, I was really struggling because at that time there was not a lot of good information. What was available on the internet was poor. Don't feed your bees. Don't treat your bees. If you're doing these things, you're handicapping the honeybees themselves. And as a all natural, organic minded gardener, that kind of made sense to me, but it didn't match reality. And so I lost a lot of bees, and I thought about getting out of it. I remember in around 18, 19, because it was just really hit and miss and just burning through a lot of cash. And I remember listening to a thing Michael Palmer did with the National Honey Show in my early 20s, and that really kind of made me think, if I'm going to do this, it's time to get serious. And so I did, and I started focusing on what do the bees need and what do I need to do. And from there, it's just been every year getting a little bit better and a little bit better. And we've built up from a couple dozen hives to the most we've ever had was 450, not including mating nukes and things like that. And then from there, Laurel was telling me that I needed to start a YouTube channel, and I told her this is a terrible idea. No one's going to listen to me talk about bees. There are people more qualified to do this, and I don't know why I should do it. And I still stand by that statement. I do believe there are people who have more beekeeping experience, and but the problem was is they weren't doing it a lot back in those days. And more people are getting on board that are good beekeepers, and it's exciting because we're hitting a golden age of information sharing and beekeeping, and that's helping all of us. And it's going to help us create products. It's already helping us create products, and that's kind of where the whole movement of the hive life started, was with the YouTube channel and building a community. And I didn't realize there was such a need for community. It's not always that I'm able to help people. I do my best to do that, but just able to inform people and be able to communicate. And I've learned as much as anybody from this YouTube channel, being connected with so many new beekeepers that I never would have otherwise. I learned about different techniques. I learned about different ways to make treatments more effective. It's so exciting. And of course, I think, and this is just my personal opinion, being a Christian, part of the fall was when that happened. One of the punishments that man got from God was the fact that even if it doesn't make any sense, their wife seems to be right. And she just always seems to be right. All I have to do is say it won't work. And it just seems like it happens anyways. If it's just like with the YouTube and the conference, definitely was right with both of those things. I thought they were definitely a bad idea financially. So, and just in time wise. So we built the conference just as a place where we could get the best and brightest beekeepers in, and also get a community of beekeepers that have created product for other beekeepers. And honestly, I can't say thank you enough to people like yourself and others who have come onto YouTube and brought some sanity to what oftentimes on the internet is a really just modge podge of poor information. And I think that we have begun as fundamental beekeepers who love our bees and do want to have better bees and less chemicals and do all these things. We also realize that it's complicated, and we're bringing a fundamental approach. And I think we're out competing the competition of what I would call lazy beekeeping, which has been really poor for the industry. So, anyways, I could talk about this forever. Oh, sorry, someone's calling me. Here, take that phone away from me, Laurel.
That's okay. We've talked in the past about, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, about how there are a lot of people that have a lot of knowledge, I think, that just hold it real close to the vest. They don't want to share. And I think that's one of the, if I'm mistaken, let me know, but I think that's one of the reasons you're kind of doing this, because you just I don't understand why people don't want to share what they're successful with.
I think there is somewhat of a reason for it. And I could be wrong about this, but reading history, prior to Varroa, tracheal, small hive beetle, some of these new viruses, it was really easy to keep bees in comparison to what it is now. And so even beekeepers that really were kind of pretty lazy could still make some honey. They could still have some bees that were alive, and it was just a lot easier. And then for the commercial operations of professionals, it was also a lot easier to be sustainable and keep your operation. So I think it was a very competitive marketplace back in those days. If we look back in the 40s, where beekeeping reached its prime, and there was just a massive amounts of colonies, a lot of it due to the war needs of need for beeswax and other things as well. And honey was more commonly consumed back then. I just think the competition was a lot greater, and you're also coming off of some generations that lived through some tougher times. And so I think that's where some of it comes from, is they felt like they needed to be able to compete. Whereas we live in a totally different bee world today, where there's not enough beekeepers to go around. Maybe, and I don't know this for a fact, but maybe in the 60s and 70s, there was too many people supplying bees and too many people supplying queens. And so that's why the prices were so low. But nowadays, queen guys sell out so fast. Packages are sold many months in advance. So I'm just wondering if we live in a different world today of beekeeping. And so those that old, and it seems to be more prevalent with older beekeepers, that I don't want to share anything mentality, but it definitely is not helping the industry. I can tell you that right now.
I agree, and I actually, now that you mentioned it, I agree with many of those points. There aren't as many beekeepers as there were, and so I think there is room for more people to continue to come in and to take a stab at it. But I do think it's much more difficult now. I mean, I still can't figure out what to do a lot of the time, and I'm trying to implement certain principles this year, and already I feel like I'm behind, and I'm just having issues with some different things that are going on with my bees, and so I think it's a great time to have you on here. When we talked a week or a week and a half ago, I mentioned to you that, hey, spring is here. People are going to have a lot of questions. People are going to want to have some guidance, some ideas as to maybe what to do, because we got the new year coming. And you did a live recently. I think the title was something like "Spring is Here" or something like that.
Something
So
like that. Yeah.
it's time to get going on this stuff. And down here in the South, we're all in right now. But I think, as the weather warms the further north we go, everybody's close. Even the people way up north are um, starting to see the bees flying and starting to crack open their hives a little bit. And so it's an exciting time of the year. One issue that I've had, and for all those who are on the chat, first of all, I really appreciate you coming on here. We've got Brian Coper in the background from Castle Hives moderating this thing, as well as I think I saw Matt and Sarah on here. I
Hmm.
did. I think Brian Carlton's on here. He also has helped me moderate in the past, and maybe some others. And I just really appreciate all you guys. I know Laurel's kind of working it from your end a little bit, came in helping out with some things. And so we just appreciate everyone who's helping out with this, and particularly appreciate everyone who is checking into the chat tonight. And John, I really appreciate that. Thanks so much for the super chat. Says bees are awesome. We love our bees in our garden. I
It's
do too. I
awesome.
love bees. Now my wife does a little more of the gardening stuff. She's got kind of in our backyard. We do a little bit, but I'm just all in with the bees. I grew up on a farm. My story is a little bit, I guess, in some ways similar to yours. I've always wanted to figure out a way to make a little money. My mom was kind of entrepreneur in spirit. She had horses. Was always doing a side hustle of some kind. She was a teacher, but also taught horseback riding lessons. Grew up on a farm. My dad was a teacher and a coach, and I was always intrigued, believe it or not, with insects from the time I was very young.
Huh.
I think I was in the first grade, and I had an insect collection. There was an entomologist that lived in our church that went to church with us, and he taught me how to pin them and identify them. In the first grade, I had an insect collection with probably 80 or 100 bugs, all pinned up and
That's
nice and
pretty cool.
everything. And so I've always been intrigued with them. And of course, as time went on, I got a little bit kind of lost interest. I was really big into sports and football and the typical things that teenagers are. But I just, my dad was really sick back in 2012, and I had a home health patient. I'm a physical therapist who had
Mhm.
bees in the backyard. He had a couple of hives set up, and I started talking to him. And just before that, there was a talk at church that kind of compared bees to the church, and I was intrigued by that. And then I saw his bees, and he started telling me about the cool things in the hive. And when my dad passed away in January of 2013, I asked my mom, I said, "Hey, do you mind if I get a couple of beehives up here?" And she said she had a friend. She had to think about it. My mom has to think about things a lot, which is fine. But she talked to a friend, I think, lived up around in Georgia somewhere, maybe over towards Atlanta. And her friend was real positive about her bees. And so mom said, "Sure, you can get a couple of hives." And then I got my first two. Fortunately, had a good mentor that sold me the nukes, the bees, the equipment, everything pretty much I needed. Just sold it to me. I set those jokers up, and the first time I looked in them, I was just hooked. And so I haven't slowed down since. I've gone a little crazy with it, but I
Oh,
just absolutely
sure.
love it. So
You
I think a little, I just like to, and I do have some specific topics I like to address. We've already talked about that, but what would you say to those who have kind of like you did that first year, maybe gotten some colonies and lost several? What would you say to those people who just are frustrated and discouraged and just kind of at their wits' end right now?
Well, first of all, the only thing I did right early on is not give up, and you have to have that mentality to be successful in beekeeping. And the few that will stick with it and emerge on the other side will be really glad that they did. And we're gonna things are getting better, and we're gonna make it better. There's a lot of people working together to make information that's vital to helping new beekeepers and seasoned beekeepers keep their bees healthier and keep them sustainably. So that's the future is looking really good. Give me 1 second. I have some allergy problems. You think with all the honey that I eat, I wouldn't have any allergy problems, but it is really quite bad.
Go right ahead.
And one of the things that I would say to new beekeepers, first of all, learn how to master a small amount of colonies. I really think five is a good number. 3 to 5. I would like to say three, like production size colonies that you're planning. These are the three colonies I want to get honey off of. And then maybe have two colonies, which I would recommend for making some splits from those big colonies and putting some either some queen cells that you have from your own stuff or purchase some queens and make those splits for sustainability. That is an important recipe in beekeeping is splitting hives. And it was back in the day, it is now. Bees are short-lived, and so they go forward quickly because they're very fast, but whenever they start going backwards, they because they're so short-lived, they can go backwards very quickly. So monitoring, getting into the hives, watch, Bob Benny's YouTube channel. Bruce has got some great stuff. I try to have some great stuff from time to time when I'm not goofing off. And there's other guys out there as well. If it sounds too good to be true, it usually is with beekeeping. Beekeeping is not unlike anything else. You got to work for it. However, once you learn to master those few colonies, you can grow very fast. But many times it's about mastering it. And one of the biggest mistakes I've made on the professional side, once we started having some success and then going down the professional route, is getting too many bees. It wasn't the fact that I couldn't handle and keep bees healthy and make my own splits and raise my own queens, but you end up with 200 hives and you only have either the tools or the time to manage 150, and the entire operation suffers. And all your bees ideal, if 100% is the most ideal, your entire operation drops down to 60% of what it could have been because you just have too much. So don't overdo it. Keep it small and do it well. And most beekeepers mess up on the three things that we talk about: the great queens, dead mites, and good nutrition. That's why we preach it. Um, it kind of gets old, especially when I've said it so many times now, but it is the case. And a colony needs a good queen, and you have to have dead mites. We say that just because they're the number one problem, but there's other things: disease, other types of pests, and then good nutrition. What is good nutrition? It's not just about what's coming into the colony, it's what they already have. And I really feel one of the main things that beekeepers are negligent on, aside from Varroa, is leaving enough food in the hive or knowing how much do I need to feed the colony. And I know so many beekeepers who have a frame of food in there, and there's 8 frame cluster of bees, and they think that that's fine. They don't realize that there really should be a minimum of 3 deep frames. So bees need to have plenty of food, and they eat quite a lot. So just always be learning and monitoring your bees, and baby them. Honestly, it's just like any other creature that we have. The more the more TLC and the less stress they have, the higher they're going to perform. It's
I
just
agree.
anything.
I think I've got a question here that'll kind of segue into something I'd like to address here. This is from Cajun Homestead and Beekeeping. Hey Bruce, how are all the swarms doing? And I'll tell you, I wanted to kind of get your opinion on this. I went across the board. I had some colonies out in California for pollination. They just got in last night, actually. But everything I had left, I pretty much split because I've had issues with swarming in the past. Down here in Southeast Alabama, it's gotten crazy. So this year, my strategy was a commercial guy that I know had access to some queen cells from East Georgia over there, and he drove over, and my other buddy, kind of my sideliner / commercial mentor, told me about it. So I got some queen cells, and I basically split everything. And now I'm not sure I did it the right way, but I just tried this. I kind of kind of did blind splits. I just kind of made sure every colony, had resources. And I didn't really look for the queen. I didn't have time. I just couldn't like spend the time to do that. So I ended up purchasing 45 cells at $4 a piece. That's affordable, even if
Yeah.
they don't work out. So I went ahead and ordered 45 cells and purchased 45 cells, put them in all the colonies, queen right or not, didn't know. And so I thought, well, I've got this thing figured out. I gave the strong colonies a little bit more space, and I had a lot of colonies that were, basically brand new colonies that couldn't swarm. But boy, I'll tell you what, that was two. Let's see, that was the weekend before, like almost 3 weeks ago. And this past Saturday, actually, here it was really cold and windy, and I know our people up north are laughing at me when I say cold, but it was probably in the upper 30s or 40s and very windy here. And in that afternoon, it warmed up a little bit, and my bees started swarming in my backyard. I think I had 4 swarms in my backyard. And then every day, I think today is the first day I didn't come home to at least one swarm in my backyard, in my blueberry bush or in my Bradford pear tree or whatever. So
Man.
I think I just like, and I don't know, I did go through, uh, I think it was Sunday afternoon. I try not to get him too much on Sunday, but I went through them, and my Apple hive in my backyard actually was just full of queen cells, and they were queen cells that were beginning to emerge. And so my theory is that possibly as those virgins were emerging, they were just swarming, taking the bees with them and swarming and swarming and swarming. And so I don't know, maybe address a little bit some thoughts you have on swarm control. Another question I would have is, what do you do when you come into that situation where you just open up a colony and there are queen cells that are emerging as you open the colony up? I mean,
Ugh.
literally you'd have a queen popping out here, and
Yeah.
you see them cutting the next cell over, they're popping out here. And I mean, what do you do with all those little virgin queens? Or just
We
how
are,
would you address that situation, I guess?
oh, fun. This is a fun topic. I appreciate that. Laurel, remind me never to do one with Bruce again. No, it's all good. So yes, I've come into that several times, and it sounds like you must have some good conditions down there if the bees are already wanting to swarm that hard. So as far as when the queen cells are emerging on you during the inspection, then man, that's always crazy. That's why I always, in like my either my truck or my Subaru, whichever vehicle I'm going to the yard with, I have queen cages with me, and we will catch the virgins and try to use them. Virgins are really sensitive as far as time goes, but we can make splits, and we'll have the cages. And what we'll do is we'll put just like a little bit of just a thin layer of pollen sub, just something that kind of holds them in just for a second. I might say thin, it's just barely enough to plug in. If I don't have anything like that, queen candy would be better. Then I will use a clover blossom or something I can stuff down in there that has a stem. I can pull it back out and cover that up, and then we will just split the colony real good.
Oh,
There's at that point, and that's all we can do about it. And what we leave in the original location is very small because they just have such a strong swarm tendency at that point. You have to break them up, and you have to divvy that out. And if, let's say we have 4 virgins, we'll break it into 4 hives, and we'll take it to some new yards. And so a lot of times we'll take the brood out. We'll give like each one a little bit of brood, but not a lot. And if there's a good bit of brood in there, and there's some other colonies in the yard that we feel like could use some beefing up for honey production, we'll actually give it to them. We're just really wanting to slash these colonies back and primarily use them for mating nukes, and not like real tiny mating nukes, but get them pretty small. And then a lot of times you'll get those virgins to come back, at least 2 or 3 out of them, and whichever ones don't come back, we'll give them about 15, 16, 17 days. We'll come back and check them, and if there's no eggs in there, we'll just combine them back with the ones that did come back, and then that works out pretty good. It's a pain in the butt, and I hate it when I see hives like that, but it is part of it. And as far as preventing that from happening, one thing I've come to realize, that the better the honey flow is, those great honey flow years, you're going to have swarming. No matter what you do, it's just going to have some swarming. And That's just what the bees naturally want to do. Now we can curb a lot of that, and primarily by pulling bees back, pulling bees back. It's really important to know when does our main honey flow start, and we need to keep them cut back a notch at all times. We really don't want them to get too far ahead of us and just pull them back. And then if this is where having drawn comb is nice, drop a couple frames. So if you got 10 frames in a box, then I would pull out a frame or two of brood. If it's really strong, 2 frames of brood. And this could be 2 weeks before the honey flow starts. Doesn't matter. Pull them back. And yeah, we might miss a little bit of that early honey flow, but I'd rather miss a little bit of the early honey flow and get them into the honey mindset where we're in the storage mindset. Because once they've really committed to producing a crop, they don't want to swarm as much. But it's getting them to that point. There's kind of a place of limbo where they want to swarm prior to that. So if we can change that over, then we're good. So what we'll do is we'll pull the bees back with yanking those frames of brood, and we'll stick some combs down in there and get them to draw those out. And of course, we must have headspace for nectar. As soon as that nectar flow comes in, they just want to swarm like crazy. And in doing all these things, you're still going to get some swarming,
Sure.
but you will eliminate a lot of it. And the best way to prevent swarming, the most surefire way, is to never let your bees get strong enough to do honey production well. Um,
Totally.
and but cutting the bees back and missing a little bit of the early crop, it does help quite a bit. And I think that's the best technique. But if you're wanting the biggest honey crop from your hives, then you got to be really intensive. Come in there about every 5 days and crush the swarm cells. Pull the bees back maybe a little bit, drop a frame, and checkerboard some combs in there. Honey is very intensive, and we don't do it that intensive because we can't afford to. So, anyways, that's kind of how we deal with it. There's really not a surefire way of dealing with this. I asked Bob this question a while back because I had bad swarming last year. I think I probably caught a dozen swarms of mine last year, and if I caught that many, there's probably at least that many again or more that I missed. So I asked Bob that, and he basically is like, "Yep, don't let your bees get that strong."
Okay, so this is it's kind of piggybacking on that question a little bit. I guess a little more detailed. Have a double deep 10 frame hive. This is from Athens Apiary. Have a double deep 10 frame hive with 4 frames of brood, and the rest is mostly pollen and honey. They're in swarm mode for the queen has no room. What can I do? And you kind of address that a little bit, but in this specific case, 4 frames of brood, the rest of it's kind of packed out with honey and pollen. What would you do in this case?
All right,
I assume it's a 10 frame deep, is what I'm assuming from the comment.
yeah, 10 frame double deep, 4 frames of
It's a
brood, and the
double deep,
rest
yeah.
is mostly pollen and honey. They're in swarm mode. Wow. So that seems, if they've only got 4 frames of brood, but they've got a lot of resources still, maybe some honey or sugar syrup in there. And that's where you have to be careful feeding early in the season too. Feeding this at this time of the year is kind of a double-edged sword. Feed just enough and it can really help get the most out of your bees and get them ready. Feeding a little too much plugs them up. So as far as in your situation, it sounds like for whatever reason, yeah, pollen and honey, there's a lot of it in there. So that's a good thing to watch out early in the season, is make sure, hey, does my queen have plenty of room to lay? And if you have a situation like what you're addressing, having to deal with right there, I would find the queen if possible. If they haven't already swarmed, she hasn't already swarmed out. It's a pain, and sometimes they can be really difficult to find. But if you can find that queen and make a split with her, then obviously they can't swarm immediately, because prime swarms take the original queen and go off with her. So she's been losing weight, getting ready for that flight. But if you can get her and move her to a new location and basically make an artificial swarm, and that's what we're doing, is that helping make the bees feel like they already have swarmed. Now you have a situation where it's not quite out of the woods, if you're able to do that, where you're going to have some swarm cells left in the original colony. However, if you leave those in there and the swarming tendency has not been dealt with, and you don't know, a lot of times the bees still have it. They'll just wait till those virgins emerge, and then they'll swarm off with those virgins. So it's you
It's
can
so
break.
much fun. It's
I
so
know
hard.
you can break the hive up a little bit more. Honestly, I think if you can get the queen and you can put her in a different hive, it could literally just be a frame of brood, like capped brood would be perfect. A couple shakes of bees. I want a good 3 frame cluster in there. Give her a little bit of food and maybe some drawn comb if you have it. And then that's that hive. Then crush the cells in the other one if you don't need them. A lot of people don't like to hear that, but if you crush the cells in that one, they can't swarm. And
Yeah.
then once they go into the emergency mode, oh my goodness, we don't have a queen. We can't swarm. We can't do anything. Then you can come back and maybe a week later, after that's gotten out of their system, they'll try to raise emergency cells, go through every frame, crush every one of those emergency cells, and then you can paper combine back the queen that you split off. And now you have your hive back. Talk about labor intensive
Yeah,
and
that's
a
tough.
giant pain in the butt. Swarming is that's the thing. When you do great queens, dead mice, and good nutrition, we finally get a great queen in this hive. We've got the mites dead, and then we've got good nutrition. We've got all those things. Now we got these massive colonies. Then swarming. That's what we have to look forward to. So it's always
So
something.
I'd like to emphasize too, I don't think it's always a bad thing when they swarm. I know I've had issues because a lot of my bees are in out yards and I don't get out there. And I'm sure I don't see every swarm that happens. And
Hmm.
but many times, I'll notice a little bit of a blip in their strength. But sometimes, as long as they don't swarm out, like a lot of mine seem to try to do sometimes, as long as it's just like that one
Right.
prime swarm, and if that hive, that colony, if they kind of sometimes they don't skip a beat. Like you almost don't even notice. You may go in there and not see much any brood or anything for a little while, but almost the time their brood emerges, that new queen has made it and she's laying, and it sometimes those hives come back even stronger. It's because it's a new young queen, and that's nature's way, I think, of replacing their queen and doing what
Right.
we're trying to do as beekeepers. And the swarm, what I found when I kept swarms with older queens many times is they go crazy. The new queen builds up quickly, but then within a month, a few weeks, they just supersede her. And then they have a new queen too. So the bees know what they're doing, but it's just so discouraging. What really discourages me is when they do the prime swarm and then multiple little cast swarms and,
Yeah.
it's over and over and over again. And that
Yeah.
just, I went in a
Yeah.
colony this past, I think it was Saturday or Monday. I can't remember what day it was, but there were all kinds of queen cells in there. But every one of them it was chewed out from the side, which means I assume that maybe they swarmed. They probably swarmed, or they were whatever they were doing, and then whatever the new queen was went and destroyed all those cells that were in there. Which to me, that's when I first started beekeeping. That's what I thought they did. But what I find is it seems like at least as often, if not more often than not, they'll just make multiple cells and they just start hatching and they just swarm out with these little cast swarms or
Yeah.
secondary swarms, and it's very
Yeah.
frustrating.
That's what kills you. And like you said, sometimes you'll have an early season prime swarm and it stinks and you'll miss a little bit of the early honey flow. But if you have a good honey flow year and they come back with a good queen, they can still make a crop if it's just that one swarm. But that's the thing. As beekeepers, we don't know, are they going to do just one swarm or are they going to do a primary swarm and then a secondary swarm and sometimes even another. But when you lose a prime swarm, you're left with still a good colony as long as the queen comes back.
That's
If
right.
if they do a secondary swarm, because when the primary swarm leaves, you still have all this brood and you have all this cat brood and larvae. But usually, by the time the secondary swarm takes off, most of that brood is all emerged, and then it takes off, and now you're left with a colony that's been queenless for a long time
Mhm.
and does not have any brood and it has old bees, and then you run into these laying worker colonies or colonies that are very difficult to requeen. But there's no way to know what the colony is going to do, and that's why, again, as a manager of our stock, we go through and we pull them back, pull them back, pull them back. We would rather, again, lose 20 or 30 pounds per hive than lose the swarm. Just
Mhm.
pull frames of bees, shake bees out, make sure they have plenty of room to stick things, pull some frames of bee bread. I've been known to go through yards on a year where we just have good pollen flows. Go in there and pull some pollen out and stick it in the freezer or give it to a colony that needs it. So it's really there's no surefire way to cure swarming or to know what the bees are going to fully do.
I agree. One principle that I learned years ago, and it works. It's worked perfectly with some colonies. Some I've just gotten it too late. A fellow named Tim Ives up in Indiana. He runs these great big, tall, triple deep. You know,
Hmm.
his queens can do it. I have one when I first started talking to him back in 2015. I had one colony. The one I picked worked exactly like you said it would. Even here in Alabama, it worked great. But I haven't been able to duplicate that. I got 315 pounds of honey off of that colony that year, which is by far a record for me. But
Wow.
basically, what the principle is, he says, you need to give the bees something to do. Like he said, they have a hoarding instinct. So you want to have the drawn comb in there for them to store the honey. The bees are going to store honey and produce the honey. Also, you want to have some, and you've mentioned this, have some foundation in there for the wax builders to be busy. And so a
Hmm.
growing colony, that's exactly what they're doing. They're making babies, they're storing honey, they're storing food, and they're producing wax. And so it really worked pretty well. It's just hard to stay on top of it. And what I found is many of our queens or my queens around here are not, they're not all consistent. Like some of them will grow up into some really nice honey producing colonies, and others, the real swarmy ones, just never hardly do. And so I wanted to move on to here's another question to follow up.
Hey, can I get to one thing real quick? Just
Absolutely.
while we're on the
Sure.
swarming, so um, you mentioned this, and I'm just gonna want to hammer it in a little bit more. Is that it's really about the mindset. We can't really do anything except try to influence the bees, and that's what we're doing is trying to get the stimuli going in a certain direction. If we can keep the bees in the mindset of expansion and or in the expansion would be we're committed to this hive and expanding the brood nest and to storing honey, then we're in good shape. So expansion and storage, that's what we want. But as far as reproduction, that's what we don't want to hit. And usually when they hit that mode is when they have a big population of bees that's crowded, they're running out of room. There's more to it than that, and there's some variables. I wanted to give an example of a colony I had last year, one of the most productive yards I have. Well, it is the most productive yard I have. Produced almost 2 tons of honey with 40 colonies over there, and for us that's good. And we had a colony over there that had a double deep on it. It built out to about 8 or 9 frames, had didn't wasn't plugged with resources. It had enough, but it definitely had plenty of room for the queen to lay, and they swarmed anyways. And then I had hives that were literally double deeps with supers on them and starting to put in nectar, and they had no swarming impulse. That colony just had that a higher propensity to swarm, and so I was glad to lose those bees. And they had some cells that they were trying to raise another queen. I crushed them because I wanted nothing to do with those genetics, and we requeened from another colony. Um, and we actually what happened is the other colony was wanting to swarm as well, and we found the queen, and we made a split, and then combined it back to that one, and we ended up getting it queen right. Long we still made a super and a half off of that colony, but the original queen was no good. And you got to be careful collecting swarm cells early in the season, because if you do that and make your splits with those early swarm cells, you are literally selecting for more of the same. So, but it's all about keeping the bees in the right mindset of, like you said, we need them wax drawing, we need them storing honey, we need them feeling like we need to raise more brood. We're not big enough to swarm yet. It's all about the bees mindset.
I like that. Let me pull up this one quick question, and it's more about super seizure cells in Nebraska. Too early for drones in Nebraska. So what should they do?
I observed super seizure cells 2 days ago. Wow, in Nebraska. Well, super seizure. I don't know what the weather's like in Nebraska. Here, we're warm enough. I'd let it ride out, but I mean, you
Mhm.
guys still get some pretty cold weather. Do you have, if they have any other bees? Honestly, I don't know what the size the colony is too. If it's a pretty good size cluster of bees, and you're like, man, this could have really done something. I'm not sure in Nebraska you have enough drones and weather to be able to get that queen mated, even if they did produce a queen.
Do you think that unless it's an emergency situation, do you think that bees will go ahead and create super seizure cells if there are no drones, or do you think there's a possibility there might be some drones in the area?
Yep.
I'm kind of like you. I kind of like to. It's an iffy thing if there's super seizure cells. Lots of times I'll kind of let them ride it out, but
I
it's scary to see.
Well, yeah, and you get some queens that just run out of gas at the wrong time, or who knows
Okay.
why. And so maybe that happened, and she just obviously they had enough to get through your winter, but
Yeah.
you could let it ride it out. And there's a chance, albeit low this time of the year, that in Nebraska probably that she gets mated, but a lot of it just depends on weather and available drones. And I've had some weird things happen. I've had a queen get mated in October and do pretty good, and here in Tennessee. But again, I've never been in Nebraska, so I don't know what else to say.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that was a great discussion, and it's so difficult to know what to do lots of times, but that's one reason we just have to just kind of move ahead and do the best we can, and then see how it turns out. And everybody has their own goals. You know, some
Mhm.
people don't want big colonies; they just want to make bees. Other people want to make honey. One thing I think about breaking the colonies down, I just thought about this while you were talking a while ago, is that you want them to feel like they have to grow, and so that's one reason I think splits are so effective, because those
Mhm.
bees just they feel like they want to get bigger, they have to get bigger, and so they never really, unless they get crowded and they do get too big for the space, they, you know, you can tend to, if you get them early enough, I think you can prevent that swarming somewhat. But
Right, and it really goes with any size. You can have a 3-frame colony, a 5-frame colony, 8-frame, 10-frame colony. Doesn't matter if they feel like we've filled out the nest. This is our nest. This is our cavity size. We now it's reproduction mode, and you can totally send off splits that you make. You can make splits and they run out of room within 3 or 4 weeks. Good honey flow coming in. Maybe you're feeding them and the honey flow's going on. You plug them out and they'll get. It doesn't matter that they're a small colony. They'll still take off. So someone asked about checkerboarding, and I have done that in the past, and I don't really follow like Walt Wright, who was a beekeeper here in Tennessee. Walt Wright had a book on checkerboarding, which was really hardcore and detailed. I pull bees back and checkerboard a little bit, kind of a little bit more of a combination, and then we'll rotate supers occasionally too if we need to. Brood chambers. Right now we're still in double deeps. We won't shrink back into singles until April with an excluder. But it's the thing of it is you have to have drawn comb to be able to make that work. And so I think it's a nice tool, and it's more intensive. But pulling the bees back and dropping those combs definitely gives them a lot more room to lay, or just to store bee bread. And that's just as important as anything if they're storing, getting bee bread away from the center of the nest so the queen can have laying room in the center.
it's kind of, when you say checkerboard, do you mean just checkerboard with drawn comb, or do you mean checkerboard with foundation?
Checkerboard with drawn comb in the brood nest.
Okay, in the
Now,
brood nest. All
yeah,
right.
it's definitely important to get the bees drawing some foundation too. But right now, I'm not worried about that. Once the honey flow starts, we will already have drawn honeycomb supers on them. And the advantage of having combs, as you know, is extremely valuable and helps with this a lot. Doesn't eliminate it, but it helps. But we'll also have in each one of those supers. So let's say we put 3 medium supers on a colony, or 5, doesn't matter. We'll put 2 foundations at least in each one of those. And so the bees are able to put nectar in the outer combs and get that out of the brood nest. But then as the flow really starts going on, we put the foundations more towards the center. And once they start drawing on those a little bit, we will come through the yard and yank all of those out, and we'll leave combs safeguarded in the yard, and we'll put combs back where we have the foundations. But even if they're drawn just a little bit, that's enough. Once the bees start drawing combs on them, then they see that as theirs and they need to expand and fill it out. And then we'll take those two, however many we have, and put them all in a medium box. And we'll put that between the excluder and the combs because they want to draw the foundation better towards the brood nest. And I think, yeah, once you get that comb, them drawing foundation, and all of those things pieced together, it's really good. It's really a matter of getting through those initial surges of honey flow the swarming and getting the bees past that into the mind of, okay, we're in storage mode now and drawing combs out expansion.
Let me address a quick question from Ian here. Hey, Bruce, did you get those hives off and down all right last night? We had some hives coming back last night from California. We did get them off successfully. I was nervous about it. It was my first time kind of transporting them myself and running the forks at the destination yard, and it went well. I actually had a young man that lives here locally, goes to church with me, that helped me out late last night getting those things unloaded. So it was fun. And I've sent bees before, just a few, but this time I've actually been involved with loading up the truck and sending them, and then being there when it got back. And it's quite the event. It was a lot of fun. But I actually missed our stream team chat last night because I was out there doing a beautiful night last night. The moon was out. It was just absolutely perfect for it. And so I did want to mention one more thing. I came in. This is the tricky thing. This is one thing I think that probably plagues most beekeepers, especially maybe in the South, where we can start splitting and creating new colonies earlier. The bees build up quickly. There's an issue with queens at that point in time. If you've got like where I'm at right here in Southeast Alabama, Panhandle of Florida, obviously in Southern Florida, and then as you go a little bit further north, really the bees are ready to start splitting mid-February, early March, sometimes even early. So is there a solution to the queen situation there? We were fortunate to get, a bunch of cells from East Georgia that someone had made, but I think it's always risky to split them down so hard this early because we do have some cold snaps. But I've never known really what to do because, in about a month from now, we'll have mated queens available. But this early in the year, or especially a couple of weeks ago, it's tough to find a solution for the queen situation.
If you can't raise your own, then yeah, it's an issue. Or just, I'm not saying you can't, but just don't have the time. It doesn't fit into your management strategy. And the queen cells, if you get access to queen cells like you did, that's about the best route. If you need to make splits and you can't get access to early queens, and one of the situations that we're in right now is the few early queens that are available that time of the year are really taken by the almond pollination guys. They're coming out of the almonds and breaking doubles in half and splitting like mad. I think most smaller beekeepers don't realize the scale. I mean, and you do more than others, taking bees to almonds, but it's a big deal. And we're talking millions of colonies, or at least a million something colonies that go out there to the almonds. And then even half of those need to be broke down and split in half. That's 500,000 queens right there that's needed for that short time period. And it's probably more than that. And then there's people that don't even go to the almonds that still need queens. So they're in high demand and in short supply. So, I mean,
it's tough.
Raising queen cells is basically, you got to know somebody a lot of times to get those early queens. I got a buddy in Hawaii that might be able to hook you up, Bruce, with some mated queens early, actually, by the way. And okay. And since I know him, you could know somebody. And that'll do that.
That's true. I know somebody who knows somebody. I know a guy.
All right. Well, and I don't know. He stays really busy that time of the year too, and it's prime time. I try to get him to come to our conference, and he's like, "Man, we're in prime time raising queens here, first week of January," which is mind blowing that they can do that then. But yeah, the best option if you can't get mated queens in a southern area like yours is if you can get access to queen cells, that'd be great. Or you can make queen cells, and then make your splits. I like queen cells quite a bit, but
yeah,
as far as making those early splits and setting them back or having some cold snaps, the best thing I can think to do is you can put an insulated board like a R5 or something maybe on the roof and help them out with a little bit of the heat conservation. But just shake plenty of bees in there. I think they'll probably be all right.
Get some questions rolling in. This one right here. Excuse me. She just this viewer asked. I guess you can read it.
I've read it. Okay. So 2 overwintered single deeps, capped drone brood, and some queen cells. Added another deep, and
queen cups. I wonder if they were actually if they had eggs in them. If they had eggs in them, obviously they're queen cells. But
So Cobra Strike, do they have any larvae in them, or are they capped queen cells? If they're queen cups, then that's very normal to see. Um, I would keep an eye on those colonies. If they're that strong at the time of the season that it is, they could just be days away from it. You're definitely gonna want to stay ahead of those bees for sure. And if you start seeing, I have had good success if I come to colonies and they don't have any capped queen cells. If I crush every cell in the colony and go through, I mean, shake frames off and make sure I get every cell and crush them. If none of them are capped, I have a good success rate of keeping those hives from swarming. But we'll do that the first time, and then they're going to try to do it again. And so you need to come back in about 5 days at the latest and do the same protocol. And a lot of times, when we do the first time, we pull them back heavily. We'll go in there. Okay, no, they weren't filled with eggs or jelly. Good deal. So if we do see that, we're able to crush them and they're not capped, we'll pull them back heavily. And then it's not always just about pulling frames of brood. Sometimes it's shaking a good bit of bees out of there too. And that really helps. We
So
just don't want them to swarm.
I may have missed this earlier when you said shaking bees out. Where do you shake them? Do you shake them in other colonies? Do you shake
Yeah.
them in a split? What do you do?
Well, it could be either one. Typically, we're shaking them into other colonies that are behind or something like that, or a split if necessary. But yeah, shaking bees really alleviates the problem a little immediately, as opposed if you take, let's say you take 2 frames of capped brood, but you leave the bees back into the colony, you just take brood to give to other colonies, then immediately there's still a lot of bees in there. So shaking like 3 or 4 frames of bees out and giving that to another colony goes a long way. And if you're going to remove brood, larvae doesn't clear space very fast. If you're taking frames of eggs and young larvae, that's still got weeks to go. So when we say taking frames of brood, we're going for stuff that's in the capped stage, and that way. Wait. I told you backwards. I'm sorry. So when I have a colony that I think might swarm, and I'm trying to alleviate as much as possible, I'm going to take frames that actually have larvae on it. Sorry, because they're going to take the longest to clear out of that space. I'm going to leave in that colony the frames of capped brood in that situation, because I know that they're going to emerge out and the queen's going to be able to lay in that. So I'm going to shake bees off. I'm going to give larvae to other colonies with plenty of bees. Whenever you give larvae, though, in a cool time of the year, you have to give them plenty of bees to not only be able to cover it and keep it warm, but also to be able to feed it. So if we do a frame of open-faced larvae, then we are going to, well, that's the only larvae you have. We're going to shake at least 2 frames of bees. So 1 frame of larvae with the adhering bees, and then another shake of bees to help cover that. Wow, that was really difficult to get out. Um,
So do you obviously you have to find the queen first. So you just want it to be because you don't want to accidentally shake the queen out into another colony. I'm assuming, right? If you're doing this.
yeah, it's best to know where the queen's at. However, I'll look the frame over, and then I'll have Laurel look it over, and then if we feel comfortable that the queen's not on that frame, we'll shake it anyways.
Yeah.
You do occasionally mess up, but it's a percentage game for us.
All right, we're getting some questions coming in. This one, I think I'm interested to see what you say about this.
Okay to consume honey from a dead out, yeah, if it wasn't treated with any crazy chemicals or anything like that. If it was just something like oxalic acid or formic, that'd be all right. I don't know what the history of those combs are, but yeah,
Yeah.
it'd be fine.
Another question, rapid fire. How do bees make hexagonal shaped honeycomb?
How do bees make hexagonal shaped honeycomb? As far as like how do they make their cells hexagonal? Is what I'm assuming.
I guess so.
Um,
Yeah.
very carefully. No, they just do. They're programmed to do that, and it's not always uniformly the same size. So one thing that I had a question the other day, someone was talking to me about small cell foundation. that was really popular a long time ago, and some people still find it useful. But that's like 4.9 millimeter. But what they find studying combs in the wild is that it varies quite a bit. You'll get hexagons that are some occasionally 4.9, sometimes as big as 5.3 or 5.4, but more often than not, you end up with the low fives, 5.1, 5.2, somewhere in that range on average.
Um, I thought it was interesting. I listened to Greg's podcast with Jeff from Premier Foundation, and when they created that product, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they had a lot of samples of bees, if I'm not mistaken, now that drew out their own comb, and they kind of took an average of that. They took that naturally drawn out comb and kind of took an average of that. I hope I'm correct in saying
Yeah,
that.
I think you're right. I think they got combs from top bar hive beekeepers that did not use any strips or anything, just completely raw as the bees wanted to draw out foundation and stuff.
I
And there's
think the
also
average size was similar to what most of the producers actually make now. A lot of it. I don't think the actual cell size was that different, was it? From your understanding?
no, and even some of the research they've done in some tree cavities and stuff, 4.9 is actually quite a bit lower, especially on a consistent rate. 4.9 is small, and it is small cell foundation. And as far as does that work or not, it may help a little bit, but in of itself, it's not enough to control varroa. That we do know.
I agree with you there. Wow, get some good questions here. This is one that I've run across several times. I'm not sure how much swarm trapping you do, but
I used to do a lot. Buddy of mine on the other side of the county, we would set up about 50 swarm traps a year. He did most of it. I think the most I ever put up was like 18 or something like that, and then he did the rest of them. But we typically averaged over 50%. So, but within that 50%, you'd get some that fill the box up in 2 weeks or less, or immediately, and then you'd get some that were like 2.5 frames of bees. Woo!
yeah,
And
well,
they're
that's swarms though. I mean, I
yeah.
had in my blueberry bush in my backyard. I came home Monday evening. I'm like, oh my gosh, my wife sent me the video I just put out. I think it was yesterday or the day before. The note I didn't talk during that video. It's like a anyway. It was a swarm I caught, very similar to the one I caught Sunday afternoon, and so my bees were swarming. My wife sent me a picture of two swarms in the blueberry bush. One of them was maybe the biggest swarm I've ever caught. The other one was just an average size Alabama little volleyball size swarm.
Mhm.
And so all swarms are not created equal. All swarms, sometimes I had some real small ones that first day. I had a nice one and a couple of small ones. The small ones almost disappeared actually on Sunday when I caught that one for the video. I had three in the bush, got home from church, I think. Two of them were small, going 2 frame nukes. One of them just disappeared. The other one, I think some of the bees that were going into the swarm catch in the video actually went in that one. But one of the swarms was just gone. I guess they either went in another one of those swarms or what. But there were three swarms sitting right there together in nukes. So you just never know with swarms. They're all going to, and some of them do extremely well, and some of them just fizzle out very quickly. I've had small ones that blow up into and produce honey the first year. So it just depends. They're all different.
So to answer his question real quick, if I catch a swarm and remove it from the tree, should I go ahead and put another swarm trap up? And absolutely. Honestly, what I love to do and what my buddy Talon and I would do is we had our set up, and they're a little bit more expensive, but we would make boxes that had frame rests and could hold frames. And we would, if you can't do this, then yes, put another trap up for sure. What we found is there are hot spots, and there are some places that consistently had better rates than others. Like over a 4-year period, you would catch 3 out of 4. And there were some locations that you might only catch 1 out of 4 years in that location. And you find hot spots. And those are the places that you definitely want to have more than one swarm trap. Or if you do take one down with bees in it, you get one up immediately. And what we preferred doing, though, is if we would catch one in that trap, we would take it down. They'd be about shoulder height for me. So I just take that sucker down, and instead of, you could just put another one up, or you could take that down, smoke it, have a box ready to put those bees in, a transport box, and then you can hang that one up. And you want to talk about a hot smelling swarm trap? It smelled like a swarm had just moved in, because it had. just moved in, and yeah, that works
Absolutely.
really good. So, but if you can totally just have backups, and
I
yeah,
don't know
there's a lot of tips on that.
I don't know how many times I've caught multiple swarms in the same spot in a year. Like they just like it's just they figure out where they want to go, and they just I guess it's because like you say anyway. I've caught multiple swarms a lot of times in the same spot.
This jar of honey right here, since Jeremy Lindsay was the one that asked that question, and he won first place in the water white category of the honey show. This is like some black locust, and isn't that clean? Nice looking jar. So the honey judges gave him first place for that, and then he gave me one of the jars because you entered with three of them. And so I just wanted to say thanks again to Jeremy for that. And also, I was on the phone with the Welsh honey thing the other day, and they have this judging system. I'm not sure we're going to go that route, but the honey show should be about 10 times as far as aesthetics go. It should look a lot cooler than it did last year. So Alabama honey, so a lot of things are winners down in Alabama. Bruce, you ought to think about entering the honey show.
Oh, I should. I got so much going on.
Roll Tide honey.
Absolutely. Here's an interesting question. I personally have never heard of this product. I don't think, but have you heard of this, Kamon?
Yeah, yeah, I have. I think they reached out to me, and I need to get back to them. But I've looked at it. I saw Frederick Dunn's clip of it. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I saw that. Of course, they can protect it a little bit easier because of the smaller entrances, and they had the chambers where you could remove them, and then you could put something in there, which could possibly, I assume, be used to carry either a treatment for varroa or maybe some other type of thing. I don't know exactly 100%. And I don't think they've announced 100% what their goals are with that, but it's a new product. I'm interested, but most Hive entrance gizmos, I'm not a huge fan of. It's just another expense. You can make a cheap entrance reducer unless it has something that's going to help me control varroa or beetles or something like that and do really good and be cost effective. I think they should invent it. We need new gadgets, but from a business standpoint, if it's like $40, $50 a trap and I stick that sucker on 200 hives, it better be working some serious magic.
Okay, we've already addressed the next thing I wanted to discuss a little bit as far as obviously I think the first category in your three tiered system is a great queens.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are some tricks of the trade in assuring that you have great queens?
First of all, young queens typically are greater queens, and Bob is given some very good presentations with some very accurate data from some universities that have studied how long queens perform at a high rate and how much less they tend to swarm when they're younger. Younger queens typically are greater, and especially in the South. And this is where we have to be careful because Southern beekeepers, if you're a Northern beekeeper, it is slightly different. If you have Italians down in Southern Alabama, they may try to raise brood for 12 months out of the year.
They do.
Yeah.
They do.
So, I mean, those queens are going, they're working hard. Roll Tide honey should be worth more dollars. Hey, Don.
Dawn's
Um,
awesome. Yeah.
so, but if you're up in like Canada or North Dakota and you're only getting maybe 5 or 6 months of brooding, I don't know how long they get up there. Maybe it's 7 or 8 months, but it's still significantly less. It's different on how long your queens will continue to go. And so, long story short, with great queens, we want young queens. We've got to look at this as sustainability must part of sustainability is having young blood coming to the operation, young queens, splits, or replacing old queens, and that's been really useful to our operation, keeping our queens younger. Our colonies are more productive. They want to swarm less. Older queens are more prone to swarming, and this is because their pheromone production is lower. There may be other dynamics as well, but the less that the bees realize, that's part of the dynamic of swarming as well. Is the bigger the colony gets and the more bees there are, they physically have to take that mandibular pheromone and spread that around. And there's other things going on as well. So that's just one of the pieces. But the less pheromone production she has, the less likely she can hold the colony together. So great queens, as far as now selection, we don't want any brood diseases. I don't want bees that are running all over the combs on me when I'm inspecting and I haven't done anything like smoke the frame and they're running all over the place like a bunch of headless chickens. I've had bees like that before and I hate that tendency.
I've got some of those.
And yeah, it's awful. So we want bees that are calm on the combs. We also want bees that are calm on their beekeeper as well. Headhunter bees are not cool, especially when you have kids running through the yard. And so gentle behavior. I want bees that are going to, just survive the winter. That's an easy one to breed for though. We only breed from the ones that survive. So that one's pretty simple. Um, Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the past. I've pretty much just let them go until they start to fail or swarm. That's kind of been my history. But last year, I talked to you about young queens or great queens, and we had discussed. And then my friends here, kind of my partners that are helping me with the sideliner thing, kind of helping teach me the quote unquote commercial side of things a little bit. They just split with cells all the time, and sometimes
Mhm.
mated queens, but they're splitting their hives all the time. And so they, between you and them, they have me convinced that young queens that are important. And so one of my goals this year is to lower the average age of my queens in my
It will
operation.
help.
Now, last year we did a lot of splits with cells, and this year I'm going to actually try some mated queens from Jose and from Greg and maybe some other people I don't know. I'm going to try some different things. But I've noticed that going into last fall, some of these bees that went out on pollination, the ones that were just rocking it going into fall and all the way through the winter were the young queens.
Mhm.
A lot of those were the successful splits I made last spring with the cells. Some of them were some mated queens I bought almost just to try to save some colonies in late August from Lappy's Bee Supply in Iowa, and they just jumped. They got released in the colonies, and even now in the spring, I got some Carniolas and Italians. The Italians I put on the pollination to grow, and now the Carniolas are starting to gain traction because it's warming up here, and so those have done well. But just brand new queens like in late summer, late August, and so I've just become a believer in this young queen thing. Now, another question I would have about that is, so if just say you've got just say 50 colonies, and everybody can extrapolate it to their own situation. How do you make sure that you have young queens or in all those colonies? I know you can split and put new queens, and that lowers the average age. But what do you do with the original queens? How do you just pinch the queens and replace them, or what do you do?
Well, and I think we need to realize that part of beekeeping is expansion, and that doesn't mean you have to go from 50 to 100 or 75. But we also need to realize that I have this thing that I say is you're going forward or you're going backwards. And so having a young queen, they will lay harder through summer and going into fall into winter. And so you have a better chance of having a bigger population of bees overwintering with a younger queen. But as far as you got 50 hives and you're wanting to lower that age, well, if you're not wanting to kill queens, then you're going to have to make splits. That's all there is to it. Now, how I go about this, some people are like, well, this queen's still laying really good. Why would I do that? Well, she is now. It's June, but what's it going to look like in October? Or even more so, what's it going to look like in February or March the next season? Well, some people are like, well, I have this one queen that's lasted for 3 or 4 years. Unless you mark them and really keep track of them, a lot of times bees will supersede after your honey flow. It's very normal. Most supersedures have to happen right after the honey flow. And a lot of beekeepers just don't notice because the bees are so big. Half the time, the queen will still be laying. They'll raise a cell, and that queen will emerge, kill her, and within a couple weeks, she's back doing the thing. And unless you're in there really paying attention, you don't know. You're busy extracting honey during that time or pulling honey or all those kind of things. And sometimes we'll have two queens going at once. But what I like to do, and we've been doing the last couple of years, is get the double screen board. And let's say we have a double deep colony that just came out of the honey flow. have a really good queen, but we're trying to keep that queen age low, we raise queen cells, or you can buy queens for this. It works either way. Put that double screen board on and pull you up some frames of brood. If you have extra combs, and you can drop whatever you take out of the bottom, you put it up top above the double screen board in its box, and then you put the drawn combs down below, and then you can leave that queen down below if you would like, and then put a queen cell or a new queen cage up above, and it'll help that new colony out because the heat from that bottom colony warms it up, and so it can be a pretty small split. And or you can, if you don't like the queen, maybe her performance is bad, or you want to just requeen the entire operation, you can drop a queen cell below, which we do, and a queen cell above. And even if only one of them comes back, you just combine the whole thing back together very easily. And now you've requeened that colony and you're in good shape. Half the time or more, depending on the time of the year, we'll get both queens to come back. And now we have two really good colonies. And that's where you end up having too much bees. And that's where, we sell colonies, and some are as singles or something like that if we end up with too many colonies. But it does seem like a good bit of work, and someone's like, I don't want to have that many colonies. But these insurance plans that we have is what, if you're wanting 10 production hives, there's no such thing as just having 10 hives that are going to never have any issues. So
Absolutely.
that's just part of how we do it.
That's good stuff, and I need to look more into the double screen boards. I've never used those. I don't have any of those, but
I like them.
between you and I think Mike Berry's used those some. I know Craig Branch,
Bob's
and we
uses them a lot too.
I need to invest in some of those maybe for the future. Oh, there was a question here from Noah.
I was just actually reading that one myself. So when you have a situation like that, I don't know where you're at, Noah. So if it's still a good ways to your honey flow, then you could see if they'll eat it. If not, you could store it, use it for a split or summer if you have room to do that. One thing that you could do is, if it's legal in your area, in some states it's not legal to open feed, you can set those frames outside on a warm day, and you want to stagger them out a little bit, because if the combs are really close together, the bees will tear the combs up a lot more trying to get to the honey and beat up the combs more. But you can get another empty box and spread those combs out and let just the bees open feed that in your entire yard, as long as, obviously, if you don't want to have any diseases to spread this way, and you wouldn't do that, but you can let the bees just open feed it out and spread that amongst your colonies. But if you're fixing to come upon a honey flow, that'd be a bad idea. So there's a couple ways that you can go about that. But if you already have honey supers on, and it's the honey flow is fixing to start, then you probably should remove it just to get it out of your way. But will they take it into the other honey supers? Not very likely. If it's capped and it's already storage, there's not a very good chance of them pulling that out and moving it, unless the queen begins to lay next to it and they're trying to clear a room for the queen to lay. That's the only case I could see where they would shift that around.
Good stuff. Well, we've addressed swarms, we've addressed great queens, and now for the real question that people have, dead mites. And we talked probably about this topic more than any of the other ones the other night when we were talking. I know that you did the video about the oxalic acid vapor, and that it's kind of weak. But my question, I think I posed to you, I may have posed this, if not, I was kind of thinking, is it seems like everything is weak, so to speak, in its own way.
It is.
So that becomes difficult because, yes, oxalic acid vapor is weak at certain times of the year. It's stronger. I think it's better, obviously, if they're broodless, but then many of their treatments you have to do when broodless, or you have to leave them in there for 6 to 8 weeks, or they're rough on the bees. You can do them with honey. They're rough on the bees. And so the other issue that I have, and this is what I'm running into right now, is we are just about ready to start stacking these things up. We got privet blooming here in about 3 or 4 weeks, if not sooner. And the bees are just busting at the seams. And so I'm going to start putting some honey boxes on here pretty soon. So what would you recommend? I guess this is a I've already asked like 4 questions, but what would you recommend for people who are in this situation right now that I'm in, for example? How do you deal with, because between now it's going to be like 3 months, 3 to 4 months before we pull the honey off for the last time,
Wow.
probably mid to late June. What do you do? Because there's so many treatments you're not supposed to use with honey on. So kind of what would you think? I mean, what's your suggestion? I mean, obviously people are going to try different things, but what do you think?
First thing I want to explore more for myself is I want to look into early season treatments and see if I need to utilize those. The best thing that we can do, you, me, everyone who's listening, and more, as beekeepers, is we've got to start monitoring. We've got to start doing it so and trying out different things. Not I'm saying illegal stuff, but you can use treatments at different times of the year that some people like. No, we need to be focusing on keeping varroa mite low throughout the year and be okay with spending the money to do that. We also got to look into some other alternative options. This is going to take a little second for me to cover this, Bruce. So buckle
Absolutely.
up.
Well, that's
Um,
I knew it. This is the elephant in the room, so to speak, right here. This
yeah,
is what everybody's talking about. Everyone's confused about. People don't know what to do, and all kinds of different techniques out there. All kinds of. It's just crazy. I think because it's a super difficult topic, and
yeah,
Umberto was on the stream team last night, and I've watched some of that back. He talked about how the power of viruses. I think with the bees that the mites are bringing those in and they're injecting it into the what's it called, the hemolymph of the bees. And so what do you do?
yeah. Just concentrating them, and you just got to keep them low throughout the season. And the colonies that we did that to look a whole lot better than the ones that we didn't. That's for sure, because most of them aren't anything to look at. But getting to the what do we do? We've got to think outside the box. We've got to keep them low throughout the year. And the only way we know what the levels are consistently is to monitor. Beekeepers are not good about monitoring. And I know that. I've learned so much in the last 5 years as I've really started to monitor and actually test. Are these companies actually giving us a product that's doing what they say it will? And I think it's difficult for them sometimes to do their job. As far as across the board, because there's humidity factors. There's down in Alabama, you produce more mites than they do up north, so it's complicated. As far as okay, so Castle Hive says thoughts on alcohol wash versus Dawn dish liquid. Dawn dish liquid works just as good. Um, Both of them work well, but if you can get one cheaper than the other, then I would go for that route. Dawn dish liquid usually would be cheaper and more readily available, I would say. But both of those do a wonderful job dislodging mites from bees. Much better than like a powdered sugar shake. But monitoring will teach us what is working and what's not, and what the mites loads are throughout the season. When we started going to 3 treatments, I remember when I first started thinking about, hey, I need a treat. I did 1 treatment a year, and you know what? I still had high losses. It wasn't much different than when I was treatment free. And that's because the treatments weren't giving me quite as much knockback as I thought. And also, I was raising more mites a year than I thought. So now we do oxalic acid in December. We do 2 rounds. We're going to probably consider doing 3 rounds per colony in wintertime. And when they're broodless, and that's why we use carnies, is so we get them broodless and so we can hammer the mites back. And we want as clean of a slate as possible. I want to look into bringing formic into my operation, but in order to do that, I have to do that prior to the honey flow because I can't do it during. I mean, you can treat it colonies during the honey flow, but who wants to pull up supers and drop mite away quick strips or formic pro? And also, typically during that time is when it's the hottest and most humid. So typically from May till September, we're not going to get any temperatures to use formic. So if I want to use formic, I have to use it late in the season when the mites have already done their damage if they haven't been addressed properly, or I've got to use it prior to the honey flow. And like you mentioned, some of us have 3 months where our honey supers are on. And if the mites are already at like a 1% infestation going into this period, then by the time we come out of our honey flow, we could be looking at a 4 to 6% or more infestation, depending on, if you have a 1% in another month, it could easily be 2%. Another month, we're looking at 3 to 4%. And by the time you're ready to treat, we're looking at maybe a 4 to 6% infestation, maybe even higher. Not all of the colonies will be this high. There'll be variables, and you'll find this with testing. But then if if you come in and you got a 5% infestation and only get an 80% kill with your treatment, that's still not enough. You're going to knock those mites back into maybe 1.5% infestation, somewhere in that area. But then let's say you treated that in August and that you're done for the year. Then in September, you're going to be back to 3% thereabouts. And your bees are going to collapse. So we've got to realize that this is about keeping them monitored and under control throughout the year. As far as what do we do to do that, that's the big question. Because again, Formic only works for me at the very early part of the season or late in the season. And I haven't used it like that before. No one around here hardly does except one guy, and he's really encouraged me. He keeps data. He uses formic acid and oxalic acid, and that is it. And has very good bees every year and has data to prove it. And he only runs 20 colonies, but he's done a lot with what he has. Now, Apiguard is a product that I like. I think it's a little bit more forgiving in hot weather, and you can use smaller dosage in hot weather. However, it doesn't work as good on little colonies. I really like to use it on colonies that are about 8 frames or bigger. And it's still in our experimental yard, didn't get but barely over 80% kill on that. With the 2 rounds of 50 grams, we do the 3 rounds of 30 grams. But again, where's the data on this?
Yeah.
And the companies will tell you their product's the best thing ever. And in certain situations, maybe it is. But I've never run a test so far. And not all of them have been this last year with the experimental yard. We've done tests with other products in the past. Oxalic acid, primarily 5 rounds in 21 days. We have never achieved close to what we were told we were going to achieve. We're still in an age of significant learning on not on just Varroa, but the products to use for Varroa. We have got to rally around this situation together, and we have got to understand that this is complicated, and we've got to figure this out. I was talking to Corey Stevens the other night and Bob Benny yesterday, and I was also on the phone with Randy Oliver yesterday as well. And we were talking about this situation. And there's a lot of people converging on this point. And I feel like if we all buckle down on it, we're going to make it easier for all of us. The universities can help out, but they can't do as much as beekeepers can, honestly. They don't have as many bees. They don't have as much diversity. And honestly, I think they have a whole lot more red tape to go through. And so we've just got to fix things for ourselves. And so talking to Randy, Bob, and Corey about not only hygienic bees, but understanding treatments better, I think what we need is a realistic, healthy expectation on both sides. We're never going to get that treatment that's going to be consistent for us forever and just knock things back like crazy. But I think on the treatment free side, I don't think we're ever going to get that consistently across the board. It's very difficult. I think we can make major leaps though in regard to Varroa sensitive hygienic, VSH. There we go. If we can get a suppressive bee that just helps us keep them low throughout the year, I'm not looking. I would love to find it. I'm not looking for something that's going to just make all my problems go away, because this is the real world we live in. Okay. That doesn't work when you're an adult. We don't get to watch those kind of films. It's a lot more difficult. So we have got to come into it with realistic expectations and accountability. And I was asking Bob, can him and I do a trial where we can take some of these bees from people we feel like that are honest, test them. Are they actually reducing Varroa levels? and then combine that with smart treatments. And if we can bridge that gap where we've got bees that maybe give us an extra month or two before we have to treat, that's amazing. I mean, if we could get something that gave us 2 extra months a year of relief from Varroa because it just held it back, that's massive. Instead of maybe coming out of your honey flow, Bruce, where you could be running into 3, 4, 5% infestations, you might be coming out of it with 2% infestations on average. And now that 80% mite kill that you get with the treatment is going to be a whole lot more effective because it's going to reduce it below 1% at that level. And so I think we're going to get a combination, but it's going to take a lot of work. I think the worst thing treatment free has done for itself, and I don't think it's, I'm not blaming like anybody in particular, but is this idea that we can just do hands off beekeeping, and that we got this special bee and that we can get this for everybody and that it's easy. And there are some companies out there that you can just buy our stock and plug in, and Varroa is no longer an issue. It is way more complicated than that. So I think if we can marry the idea of smarter treatments, understanding how they work, plus suppressive bees, and the beekeepers have got to deliver on this. Not, we can't wait for the universities to do it because they've already had their chance for as long as I've been alive.
Yeah, I think that, and Corey is the VHS guy, isn't he? He's the guy that's
Yeah, he's the
he's the conference. He's the conference, right?
yeah, he's the one I had up on stage
That's
with
right.
Bob and David and I, and he
So
seems really honest, and I think there are honest men and women out there doing it, but they get diluted down. It's kind of like YouTube, where they get diluted down with 8 to 10 guys or gals that are selling resistant bees that really are
I
just
agree.
garbage.
Well, I Matt and Sarah asked about what about bee weaver bees. I know Corey's got a hygienic line, and I think that it's kind of hits a little bit on what you talked about. These people did not just let their bees sit out there and die. They didn't, like, it wasn't natural selection as far as we're going to let all our bees die to develop these lines. There's a lot of research, a lot of science, a lot of work that
A
went into
lot of work.
developing these lines, and they're always trying to improve them and get better. And so when a new beekeeper comes in, and I know I kind of went through this phase for a couple of years. It's got to have you've got to have a strategy for developing that. You can't just say, I've got these random bees and I'm going to set them out there, 10 colonies, and 8 of them are going to die. So 2 are going to survive possibly. And I'm just going to get 8 more colonies and just continue to do that, or split those. There has to be really a process behind that, a plan behind that. And that's one reason I think a lot of people probably get out of beekeeping. They say, I just can't do it. Well, probably because a lot of them think they can just set their bees out there and just survival of the fittest. And you might improve over 10 or 15 years, but who wants to lose 80% of their bees for 15 years in a row? I mean, I don't. And
And you
so,
don't have to go that way.
exactly.
You can treat them and identify. If you actually do alcohol washes and do the research, you can find, hey, these are not worthy. These, for whatever reason, had lower mite loads, and we are going to requeen the rest of these poorer colonies with something else and do it like that. So, but we've got to come to it with some accountability on this. I know guys, and I have tried, queens. I've seen people mentioning Saskatraz, bee weaver, all that stuff. I know guys who have lost bee weaver queens to Varroa, and it was very apparent by the bottom board how many mites were in those colonies. These where's the accountability to any of these companies? And they're able to charge as much as they want, and it's a free country. They can do whatever they want with their businesses, but literally they can say they're treatment free. Why can't I say my bees are treatment free? They would not be treatment free, but with my YouTube channel and the presence that I have, I could totally do what some guys have done on YouTube: buy bees from some commercial operator for $90 a package, stick them in a nuke, call them treatment free, knock that price up to $250, and sell every single one of them and make a killing. And where's the accountability? Where's the proof? And there's so many people that do that it dilutes down the people who are doing it right. So I think we've got to realize that we're fighting some beekeepers who would take advantage of us. we've got to find the honest people and focus. And I think a program needs to be created where you have AI breeders who are creating queens that are proven to have a certain degree of suppressive ability. They sell those AI queens to people who will raise the queens. And I think that then those people need to have accountability and on they get checked up on, and how are the mite loads doing. I think there needs to be a lot of accountability, but I believe if that was done and it was shown, hey, this is actually working, it's a lot easier to keep these bees than it was other ones, then you could see where people would catch on, and the problem would be then producing enough to keep up with demand. And I think maybe the more of that got spread around, the easier it would be for all of us to keep bees here in the United States. And then what would happen, and this is what I feel like, and I could be totally wrong, but in order to sustain this, you have to have two things. You have to have the accountability, and then you have to have the money. And the money comes into place where these AI queens need to go for probably $1,200, and the guys that make the queens need to buy them, and then they need to charge more for those queens. If the average queen's going for $40, they need to be at least 50. They need to get a premium, and people need to. But I mean, if it's saving you treatments and saving you hives, then it should work. But it needs to be a monetary system to where it creates an arms race for who can produce the best bees for resistance to varroa. Right now, even if you have a super bee, you're still competing with fraudulent people. And I just think you've got to find a way for these producers to be incentivized by money.
I agree.
Because then, I mean, if it's just one person who's got a passion, they'll work themselves to death, like some of the ankle biters and the mite maulers and those guys. And there needs to be money coming in so they can afford to buy staff and expand. But it's going to take a lot of work, and the right people have to be involved. And I think it's going to take all of us, all the way from the influencers on YouTube to the people who are actually doing the data to the beekeepers in their backyards, to all rally around this problem if we want to make the headway.
It's the Hive Life movement.
Yeah, kind of.
I wanted to say thanks to Steve for the super chat. I appreciate it, man. We do put a lot of work in, and Kamon I know Kamon puts an incredible amount of work into his channel. I put a lot into mine, as do anyone out there who's serious about YouTube and trying to create content and things that'll help other people and entertain other people, honestly. So I appreciate it, Steve.
Well, I want to say thanks to Steve too. He's donated a lot to our experimental yard and stuff in the past and other things as well. So he's a big supporter of what we're doing, all of us.
Thanks. I think you made a great point, though, and this is a point that I got out of the conference when I wasn't going around and talking to other creators and the vendors and stuff. You know, I saw the presentation you had with Corey up there. You had Dr. Peck up there. I believe it was yourself and Bob possibly, and you guys had a great discussion. And then Dr. Peck, was it Dave? Is it Dr. Peck was up there later,
Yeah,
and he
David.
said,
Yeah,
you know, whenever you create one trait that's desirable, you may have to give up something else. And so if you've got bees like that are, you know, that are super hygienic, and I don't know anything about Corey's queens, but I know that some quote unquote more resistant bees tend to be a little more feisty. They also tend to be more swarmy, possibly smaller honey producers at times, but you know, so you may give up. You may have a great honey producer that's not as good on mites. You may have, so those are the things you're not going to ever have probably a perfect bee.
No.
And so that's something you have to, I think that's what you're trying to say here. And what I think is important to realize is that there is no perfect bee that's going to do everything perfect all the time. And so I love the approach that you've discussed. And I think that Dr. Peck brought this up. I know that you and Bob discussed it, is that it's a great idea to have a great treatment strategy, but also work on the hygienics of the bees and just try and continue to develop and progress. And I do agree that the incentive with money is an issue. Some people don't believe in that, but that's how the world works. I mean, if you want to be successful, you should be rewarded for that.
You got to put your money where your mouth is, and it's like one of the companies we wanted to see take off, and they're just releasing their first products this end of this month, is Thorn Manufacturing. They're going to be making extractors and bottling tanks and wax melters, and clarifiers and stuff here in the United States. And I ended up canceling an order with one of the bigger companies that I had back in November, and stuck it over on his stuff. And honestly, it's a little bit of a gamble on my part because I've never seen him build a wax smelter, and the other guys have kind of a little more proven track record. But we've just got to you got to make money. I mean, that's the only way that you can see innovation. We're starting to see innovation in this industry, but people have got to be able to afford to live and be able to take care of their families. And with the conference, since we were able to make enough money last year to see, okay, we can afford to do this. We're going to be able to have guys like Paul Kelly from Canada fly down, and Ian, and we're going to double the speakers. The Hive Life conference is going to look like it really hit the protein the last year, and so it's going to be quite more awesome. And because of that, we're going to create a lot more opportunities for people too. And we hope that people hear that and think, how could I come to the Hive Life conference and either create a new product to sell or do something different? I don't know. Be creative and become, it's an opportunity to network and to do something crazy. I mean, and that's basically what we specialize in is craziness. But
I absolutely just had just a phenomenal experience this year up there. And I think a lot of people that went were just, in all the information, of course, was great, but the whole experience was awesome. I thought this was a little bit from Craig. You've probably never had an experience that went wrong, anything like this, have you,
no,
Kamon?
never been stuck in a bee yard before. Never had to get towed in a bee yard. Other than like a month and a half ago, I got stuck. Yeah, that's you hate those days, but at the same time, it's just part of it, and it's better than being in an office and having a bad
I
day.
I always say it's always an adventure. Even just pulling up, like the other day, I was talking to who was it? Somebody. I think it was actually Craig from Sideline Beekeeper who just put that comment on here. I was talking to him on the phone, and I pulled up to my bee yard. Actually, that swarm that I did the last video on yesterday, I pulled up to that bee yard, and I had split those down the same way I had all my bees. And sure enough, that swarm was hanging right there. And so I said, "Well, there's a swarm right there I got to catch." And I sent him a picture of it, so he got the first preview of what that thing looked like before anybody else did. But it's
Always
just
an adventure.
always something, and it is always an adventure. But that's one of the beekeeping is it's a two-edged sword in a way. To me, it's the most awesome thing about it is it's somewhat unpredictable, but the most frustrating thing about it is it's somewhat unpredictable. It's just because you got,
Mhm.
it's just always a challenge, it's something to figure out, something to do. But then, man, I just wish I could figure out how to make them all do the same and be consistent. The
Oh, yeah.
consistency across the board is so frustrating to me that I treat them the same, and I try, do that, and it just doesn't work. I did have one thing I wanted to mention. You were talking about the selection of the more mite resistant type colonies in a bee
Mhm.
yard. And I don't know if you've noticed this. The fact that you made that comment tends to make me believe that you did. When I go through and I do look and I have evidence of mites, whether it be through an alcohol wash or whatever, it seems like, just say, for example, I've got 20 colonies. A lot of my colonies are feral swarms, I call it around here. I've brought in some other genetics from outside via cells and mated queens over the years, but it seems like I'll have a small percentage, maybe out of 20 colonies, maybe three or four that will be just full of mites. And the rest of them are
Mhm.
usually pretty good. And so there's just, it's just, it's just difficult. So I guess and sometimes those that have the most mites seem to be the strongest colonies, but they also seem to be the ones that'll crash. Lots of times the stronger
Yes,
colonies seem to crash. And so,
for sure.
do you notice that as well? That most of them seem to be pretty good, but then you'll have a few often that are higher in the mite load.
Yes, well, in the experimental yard, we had some colonies that there's some that literally had very little mites in them, and there were some that had 8 times the mites. And
Mhm.
there's drift has something to do with it. I think also, like when we overwinter and we do our oxalic acid vapor or whatever our protocols is for treating, there are some outliers that either had more than what we thought. Maybe the alcohol wash, if we did one, um, we took a sample that just happened to get a collection of bees that didn't have as much or whatever, or maybe our treatment didn't work as good. But there are always those outlier colonies, and they're the most dangerous to our operation. And that's why I like doing alcohol washes after the treatment. And I don't do them the first round of treatment, so I just treat blindly after we pull honey supers in June. Just try to get those supers off as fast as possible, get those things treated, and then in August, let's get back out there and do alcohol washes. And it's a lot of work, but let's do every colony, because out of 300 colonies, you might end up with 20 or 30 spread throughout multiple yards that have you're washing these other colonies like we're still good. We only have a 1% mite load over here, or not even a full 1% here. And then there'll be this one that has like 12 mites or 16 mites in an alcohol wash. You're like, what in the world? That one crashes on you and shares 3 or 4,000 mites with that bee yard as they get robbed out. And you just reinfested your entire yard and risk, if there's more than one of them, then you create a domino effect and just through the yard.
So here's another question for you. When you do find those, like if you're utilizing a good system for checking, what if you find you got 10 colonies, you have 2 that are loaded up, the rest are fine? Do you just treat those 2 colonies, or you treat them all?
Just hammer those suckers, those 2. If the other ones are fine, and you know that, just get those 2 and hammer them and hammer them, hammer them. And keep in mind, again, don't assume that your treatment will give you 90 to 100% kill. Assume that it gives you 70 to 80%. And realize that if those mite loads are high, then you might need to treat more. And this is again where we're just learning. I mean, we've talked about this a million times on my channel, and I think with you as well at some point on the stream team, is that the mite loads, there's still things we don't know about Varroa, and there's also things we don't know about our treatments. And that's what's dangerous about where we're at. There is more unknown still with the products that we know best than what we do know about the products, how humidity affects it, all of these different factors. And it's like when I was talking to Randy Oliver yesterday, and we were talking about the oxalic acid pads. And I don't know if you watched Bob Benny's video on the, oh, I can't remember the name of them. They had a start with an A, but those strips, those oxalic acid strips that he tested, they're like from Argentina or somewhere in South America.
I saw somebody. I saw them discussing it in one of his videos, and I thought it was, apparently it wasn't you. I saw somebody else mention it. Maybe it was Bob, one of Bob's videos. I have not seen the video, but I did see that in a title of somebody's video. It must have been his. I know I saw it somewhere.
Just recently in the last handful of videos, he had the researcher on from Auburn and a couple from Georgia, and they talked about the data. And there was a lot of really interesting facts, and I'm going to get a summary here. It was very, very exciting, and Randy was interested to hear it, is that these oxalic acid strips averaged a 55% kill rate. But if you look at the chart, they did 3 groups. They did a control group with no treatment. They did one with the oxalic acid strips, and they did some with Apivar. And maybe what was as interesting as anything is Apivar did not knock the mites backwards. The mites actually just almost flatlined the entire treatment period, which those of you who are been using Apivar, I would just watch out, because it's not just Bob and me that are dropping it, but there's some universities that are saying that it is just not doing what it's supposed to. So, but there are some people that are saying it is. That just means you need a monitor. But the Apivar flatlined, the oxalic acid just about flatlined too. It did not knock the mites backwards, but it didn't really allow them to grow to high proportions. So what if we were to say, get it legalized to where we could get strips like that? And this is some of Randy Oliver's data is showing the same thing with his oxalic acid pads. Guys like you, if we could get it legal to use those, except maybe with honey supers on, you could literally chuck those on as your bees are getting shipped to the almonds and be maybe not knocking mites backwards, but just keeping them from going forwards. And then when you get back and the honey flows on, you take those things off. Thank you, Tristan Osborne, Allen Cap. And then when the honey supers come off, you can do a harder treatment. Let's say you do Apagard or another product and knock them back, and then you can throw on some more Swedish sponges or some of these strips or something like that. And maybe it's not always about, if the mite loads are high, then this is not a good tool to use, because if you have a 4% infestation that just holds them where they're at, you're not gaining any ground. Neither are the mites, but you need a knockback. But what if your mite loads are 1% or under and you throw this on? And some people are like, well, that's not very high. Why would I bother treating? But if you leave, they were leaving them in for a couple months. So if you were able to keep those mites from moving forward for 2 months, that, as long as they're low enough at the beginning of the treatment and it actually worked, that would be valuable. So I think we need to start being a little bit creative in how we view treating bees. And also, Randy's trying to get it to where he can get these legalized in the United States. In his recent American Bee Journal article, he made note that in New Zealand, they are allowed, as beekeepers, you cannot sell it. It's illegal to sell it, but you are allowed to use glycerin and oxalic acid in a paper towel or a sponge and able to treat with those and make them yourself. And it's legal to use in your hives and your hives only. You can't sell them. He's trying to get the EPA to let them do that here. They're not really interested. So everyone who's watching, watch out for this. Randy Oliver's trying to make a lot of moves and he needs some help. And we might be helping him do that in the future. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe he'll get it on his own. But when I was talking to him on the phone, I told him, like, man, if you need some help, whether it's getting petitions signed, I would be happy to donate myself to something like that. But we just need to be more creative. One more thing I'll say about that Allen cap treatment. Those who are concerned about oxalic acid getting into the colonies and maybe building up to high levels, they did notice after the strips removed, they tested a little while afterwards, and the oxalic acid was slightly elevated, very little, but it went up just a small percentage, and actually it was lower than the percentage honey naturally has in oxalic acid still. So oxalic acid is still higher in honey than it was in the areas and the regions where the oxalic strips were in the wax. So just throwing all that out there, but there is exciting things going on, and there are people who are working towards that. I see myself kind of in the future more leaning towards that side of the beekeeping industry than actually being a professional operator, because we need it. And I think we need to get as many people involved as we can.
Yeah, that's really good stuff, Kamon. And I guess the takeaway from all this is that it's important just to know what's going on with your bees. Each person has to make their own decision on what they're going to do with their bees. Really, there's different products out there. The frustrating thing to me is that some of the things that I think would probably work best maybe not even be legal, which makes it frustrating as well. And so that's kind of just where we're at with this thing. But it sounds like we're trying to, small rudder trying to turn a big ship here, and we got a few people that are really trying to. It's just we need to be done with the old way of doing things. We need to have, now with the technology we have and all the people, a lot of young people like yourself that are out here that are really committed to this. I think it's going to take a lot of steps forward. We've kind of addressed the top two things, and now I guess this time of the year it's a little tricky. I know down here we're almost past needing a lot of supplementation. If you have any more comments on the mites, feel free to do that. But I'd like to kind of move into the good nutrition portion of things. Just kind of address that a little bit and see what you think. I am not really an expert on this. I'm pretty much down here. We get pollen most of the year. And then I just feed a lot of basic, just sugar water type stuff when I feel like I need to. I'm not real scientific at all with that, but the bees do pretty well as long as they don't starve here. They take off pretty good in the spring. And like you said earlier, if you feed too much too soon, it can become an issue. Like I think I might be experiencing some of that, because when I was trying to build my bees up to go out to almonds, I just fed them all. And so those have to be built to a certain point to go and to meet grade. But I really didn't need the rest of my bees to be that strong as they were, but I just fed everything because I'm like, well, I'm feeding these bees, and that may be part of the reason I've been in trouble a little bit with the swarming. And so, um, just what do you have to say if you have anything else about the mites, and then maybe move into the supplementation a little bit if you could.
Oh, I can talk mites all day, but we'll go into the
I know I could
nutrition.
talk. I could talk about bees all day long, and mites I agree because there's so much to talk
Yeah.
about. But
And again, that's why we have not had historically good success with one treatment forever. Apivar worked good for a while. Um, Apistand and Checkmate worked very, very well for a short period, albeit they were extremely toxic in hives, and crossed together created even more toxicity than they had individually. So they were pretty nasty, nasty stuff. And then Apivar came in and was cleaner, but still a synthetic. And then the issues we have with a lot of like the formic and the thymol is that they're temperature sensitive. And for some of us, they're more advantageous than others. But we've just got to dial that in as far as that goes. And I think that's where we've got to stop leaning just on the crutch of treatment, but we can't lean fully on the crutch of treatment free either. But if we can get a little bit of both of those working together, maybe we can better our situation here. I think that's the way forward. My personal opinion. Now, as far as the nutrition goes, that one is highly variable. What you need to do. Some places have a lot more pollen, some places have a lot more nectar. And I just in my region, between bee yards, there are some bee yards that the bees are easier to keep there because they actually have better forage than they do 7 or 8 miles down the road. And those yards do better because they just get more of the good stuff. So a lot can change by your location. We feed most of our pollen patties this time of the year. Just smoothing things out. We usually start in February, and then we feed a decent bit through parts of March, and then we're done. And but as we make splits, if we make some splits early in the season, we're going to get a rough spell of weather. We'll throw patties on, and the beetles can be a little bit of an issue, so they have to be small in relation to the colony size, and the softer patties do better. And as far as summer goes, yeah, we'll feed them. If I'm going through a yard, I'll have patties made up, and I may only they already have bee bread in there. I'll go ahead and chuck them in there. I think that's helpful myself, but not everybody does that, and it's not really necessary for established colonies that have a lot of bee bread coming from spring. It's typically the splits that benefit from it the most that maybe didn't get as much of the bee bread or have no bee bread. So we'll do that. I don't find dry works very good for me in summer. The bees just won't take it. There's just enough pollen coming in to keep them from hitting the dry hard in summer. So I'll set it out, but they just won't fool with it. But they'll take the patties in, and I definitely see a benefit. But we have to keep the beetles low and make sure that we have strong colonies that it can eat the patties in just a couple days. As far as I wanted to say real quick, some people have watched my video on the Michael Palmer pollen patty recipe, which we did change it slightly on the ratios because, and he had told me he was going to change it. He actually messaged me today and said that he had changed it. I'll probably release that information pretty soon on his adjustments. But honestly, I like putting the gelatin in there. It makes it, in my opinion, a little bit of a better texture and slows how fast they dry out. The reason that you can get like a patty from Man Lake or make the one that won't dry out is with what you're using as a sweetener. If you're using a syrup as the base or part of the base, that actually brings in moisture. It's hygroscopic. Where sugar, if you use that as a source of your sweetener in the patty, it dries them out like real pretty quick. So Michael's is a very cheap and affordable recipe, but it does tend to dry out. If you make it, you put it on the bees, and if the bees are strong, they eat it quickly, and also they generate a decent bit of humidity and help keep it from drying out real fast. I typically find the big colonies, they don't dry out at all on those. It's the little ones that can't eat it real quick. And also one of the things that you run into when you use sugar as a base as opposed to syrup is that you get a little bit more inconsistency on the patty texture. And that's where people will have to slightly maybe add a little bit more sugar or a little bit more ultra B to balance it out. Because what I'm finding from getting a lot of reviews from people who have made them, overall, they're working very well. But there are a few people like they're a little bit runny, had a, add a little bit more to it. And some of those people run like water softeners where they live, and the water just doesn't have the same, you know, thickness that mine does. It is not holding mineral content, so you have to watch it with your water. So as far as feeding bees, though, the main thing that we need to touch that beekeepers miss is not keeping their bees in food. They never, ever, especially in summer, need to run into a period where they have to retrench and go backwards. That really takes its toll on honeybees, because it might be just 3 days to you, but for a honeybee's lifespan, that's a big portion, and they will gear back the colony. They will cannibalize brood. And in the summer months, we don't want them going backwards, especially because these days we have a lot more to deal with. We have small hive beetles, we have varroa, and the bigger our population is, the compared to the mite load, the bigger of a gap there. If we have a 1% infestation at a 60,000 bee population, well, what happens if we drop down to 30,000 real fast, but the mite population doesn't get killed with it? Well, that 1% now is a 2% infestation, if you get my drift. So keeping bees strong and healthy is really important. Plus, in late summer, we run into problems like sometimes it's yellow jackets, robber flies, dragonflies. All these populations have been building throughout the season. So we need a good, strong population to contend with these natural forms of, predation. And so it's just there's a lot to summer beekeeping, and the last thing our bees need is a nutritional hiccup.
Sure. Hey, speaking of that, first of all, I'd like to quickly address a local question here from the Grammy midwife here. She actually lives about, I've got bees in Ozark, which is where she lives. And so I've never met her personally, but she lives right here. She's asking if I'm feeding my bees right now. I would say the only issue here now is we're right on the verge of having a lot of stuff coming in, but if you aren't seeing stores in your hives, you need to probably feed a little bit. But if they've got honey and pollen in there, you're probably good because we're close to it. But with the population build up the way it is right now, if there's no honey in there or no food source in there, they could run into a starvation issue very quickly. So that's the only thing I would consider. But if your bees have some honey in there, it doesn't even have to be a lot right now. I think we're about to hit some. They're already bringing in some stuff. The strong colonies are. But it's crazy how you'll have one colony they'll be full of nectar right now, and I don't know what's even blooming, and other colonies won't have anything. It's just weird. They'll be strong. They'll have honey still in there. They're not eating. It's just bizarre.
Sure. Well,
but I would like to also ask a question. Came in. You mentioned that a crash in the summer or a weakening of the colony of even a few days can create major issues. And this is what happened to me last year. I know it is. What are some things? I've got my theories, but what are some things you think that cause that colony? Obviously, lack of food, but what would cause that colony to go backwards in the summertime like that? What kind of things would cause that?
The fastest thing I can know of is lack of food. And the first example I learned of just how stark and quickly beautiful colonies go downhill is when I tried single brood management for the first time. And we produced good honey, had them all the way down to singles. And I took the honey off the top, and I was going to feed, and I did feed, but I had something come up some of it was weather. And, you get behind and you procrastinate. It must've been 4 days later, maybe 5 days later, I got to those colonies and brought out pails, and man, some of those hives had completely burned through all of the food they had in the bottom box. We were in a complete dearth. Robbing was going, and it just took the populations from what could have covered 3 deeps worth of bees down to like 8 frames. They just collapsed. They didn't have enough food to sustain the colony. And I think they sent off the older population, just said, get out of here. And they kick, bees will do that towards the end of the season. Those older bees will just run out of the hive and they'll die because it's so extreme that, hey, we're going into winter. We don't need to be a problem for these colonies and eating their resources. They just collapse because of lack of food, partial starvation. And I could feed all I wanted to, but there was no getting those bees back to that strength. what we need coming out of spring. Spring is the time of growth and reproduction. It's easy to do at that time of the year. Beekeepers do it then. Make your splits, make your queens, all that stuff then. It's easy, it's natural. All the conditions are there for you. But once we get over that hump and we start getting into the robbing season, it needs to be a gradual downhill. And then you get to the fall flow. And if it's an okay when you get a little blip of growth, to go right into the winter season with good, healthy, fat bees. But if you have that food issue, that's one of the reasons they'll collapse really fast. Now, since then, if I take that honey off, I feed them that day. We take that honey off and we don't put on like a gallon of thin syrup. We'll put on 2 gallons and then we'll come back in a day or two and feed another 2 gallons. And we'll hammer them with like 10 gallons back to back to back because you have to. And what you also have to realize is 1 to 1 is very thin. I know you know this, Bruce, but 1 to 1 syrup is nowhere close to a frame of honey when it's condensed down. And bees will consume a gallon. A good double deep will consume that in like a day or two if it's real thin syrup. So it takes a lot of food and energy to sustain a colony. Now, as far as other collapses in summer, Varroa, of course. The viruses can really wreak havoc. And even if it doesn't cause the death of the colony, it can cause them to be weak, which opens them up to more issues from small hive beetles, which can contribute a lot to that. And then if you have a collapse of beetles, and it's all a domino effect. One of these things by themselves might not be enough to kill the colony, but you tie in Varroa dropping down with some nutritional stress, and boom, your colony's toast. You tie in Varroa and a diminishing population that with small hive beetle on the rise, and maybe that rise is because you had a couple colonies that got slimed out. And I had this happen in my yard here at the house this year. My other yards it didn't happen, and I let it. I got behind, couldn't manage. We had like 450 hives, couldn't manage it all. We were working on the conference and other things going on, and I had probably 2 or 3 hives get slimed out, and I probably shot 5,000 beetles larvae into the ground. Well, they pupate and they're coming back, and they're going to be in the hives as adults just within a month and a half. So within that time period, now I've reinfested all of my colonies, and not just reinfested. A lot of them already had about 40 or 50 beetles. So now there's 200 in there. And so it's really about these combo effects. And this is why a lot of times beekeepers are having issues because they have multiple factors going against them. And I believe that's why the approach of tackling these big issues with multiple factors, like you have treatments combined with better bees merging together, that's where we're going to get the results because we're using the combos in a positive manner instead. So those are really the things that I see as colonies going back in summer. Great queens, dead mites, and good nutrition. It could be a queen issue as well.
Yeah, I had many people have known my story if they watch the channel, and we've discussed it probably on the stream team chat. We've discussed it. You and I have discussed it. But I think my issue, I lost a huge percentage of my colonies last year right after honey flow, right after we pulled the honey. And we had, I know in other parts of the country and even other parts of the South, they had not a great year with honey production. But right here in this area, we had probably the best year I've seen since I've had bees. And pulled all kinds of honey off. I was just so excited about how well the colonies were doing. And that's one reason why I asked that question. And then they started crashing. We pulled the honey off. I noticed pulling honey off that day that there were a couple dead outs, here or there. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, well, that happens. No big deal. But then I didn't get back out there. I was trying to get the honey stuff taken care of, get the honey super stored, get everything taken care of. And I was exhausted, just to be honest.
Sure.
Who, just totally exhausted. And so I don't think I went back out to the actual bee yards in at least a week, maybe 2 weeks. And then I started finding 5 dead outs here, 3 dead outs there, 6 dead outs here. And it was very discouraging. But I think you hit on a lot of, I think number one, it was probably could have been some older queens. I think some of those colonies with the honey flow we had got honey bound. I didn't go down into the brood nest I just stacked them up and just kind of left them alone for 2 or 3 months, and they looked so strong and good. I'm like, I don't have to check that honey nest, but I think they probably got honey bound and the population dropped. Possibly hive beetles took over. And then mites. I think obviously that was probably an issue too. So
You probably had multiple things. Like you said, you always end up with a couple of colonies that get queenless, it seems like. And so that might have been the initial ones that you saw that were dead outs. And then there's probably a handful of colonies that, like we talked about earlier, that had higher mite loads than the rest of them. And
mhm.
they crashed because of that. And maybe some of those earlier dead outs had some small hive beetles that were able to reproduce because of that and reinfest the yards more. And then we're talking a combination of mite collapses, getting robbed out, infesting the rest of your colonies, small hive beetles reinfesting your colonies,
Yeah,
and you just it makes it really difficult. We're also talking about a time of the year where robbing is prevalent and bees
yeah,
are
it's horrible.
also
It's rough.
stressing each other out as well. So it's it's a
It's a
rough time of the
challenge.
year. Yeah,
But and as this, even if it's like whatever the issue is, when that if even if it's honeybound or whatever, population goes down. If I'm understanding things properly, number of mites per bee it can go up because there's fewer bees. You know what I mean?
right.
So it's just a perfect storm, so to speak. But
And we talk mites, but it's really about the
the
viruses,
viruses,
and
yeah,
you know that. But so when we're looking at those mite populations going up, the bees, when they're healthy and they're getting fed well, that's why in spring they usually do pretty darn good because they're getting the most perfect diet that they'll ever get, and so they live longer. Their fat body, which is like their liver, is able to detox things at a much higher rate the healthier it is, and because of that, the bees can take more abuse. Also, you raise more drones in spring. So the drones are taking a lot of the virus and the mite population abuse,
hmm,
where in summer, there's less drones and sometimes no drones, especially if you run through a period of a little bit of where your colonies are getting light on feed. Yeah, they're definitely cutting all the drones out. So you have that shift. And the percentage game with the mites and the bees is once it gets so close, the viruses just literally run rampant and you get your colonies that will abscond on you. If it wasn't for the viruses, we could handle a lot more mites. Some of you have heard me talk about this, but many years ago, 1990s, even I believe from what I understand, the early 2000s, which I was not beekeeping at that time. I just like to read a lot of this stuff. And I've talked to guys like, Bob and Randy about this. It was the mites weren't as devastating as they are now because we've had new viruses that are worse. And so what those viruses did is what back in those days you could have, you know, a 10% infestation and recover that colony. Nowadays, a 10% infestation, most of the time those bees are already dead. And because the viruses have just already permeated throughout the colony and caused them to abscond and collapse. So it's just we're living in different times and ever changing, and that's why we've got to also change and get ahead of the times. I'd like to make a little correlation real quick. So if we look at, I'm an avid gardener and also like chickens and all those kind of things as well, and fruit trees. But the problem with a lot of the heirloom gardening, and I love heirloom gardening, is that some of these plants had pest problems or primarily disease problems or virus problems back in the early 1900s. We're still selecting from the same exact stock trying to maintain that heirloom plant, which is cool. The problem is as the viruses and the diseases continually every year to become more resistant, because our bodies do that as well. If our bodies did not develop antibodies towards problems, the human race would have been gone a long time ago. And also, naturally evolved towards these pressures. But when we select from older plants and fruit trees that we've cloned, or we're trying to maintain a certain type of animal, and we're not keeping up with the times. And these pressures are getting stronger by the year, and we're falling further and further and further behind. I feel like with beekeeping, we're kind of in that position in a lot of ways because many of us, myself included, we get busy and we don't have a lot of time. I don't have time to become a professional bee breeder. I don't. Got too many things to do, and Bruce definitely doesn't. He's got a full-time job and then got a basically almost full-time bees, and then he's got to do YouTube too. I tell you that YouTube's a slave driver. And so we don't have time to do those genetics as well. But as long as we're maintaining bees that have no resistance, mites and viruses are going to continue to make changes. We've got to encourage and support the people who are making changes so we can try to keep up. And I don't want to be like those heirloom plants that, hey, yeah, those tomatoes are cool. They're old fashioned. They're 200 years old. The diseases wipe their, they kill them. And you
Mhm.
can go to somewhere like Johnny's, which is one of my favorite places as well. And you can get varieties that have been developed and they are more resilient and resistant to these strains. But they're only 2 years old, and some people don't like that. But hey, I like tomatoes that actually plants that make a lot of tomatoes. There was a question that popped up. Yeah, sorry. Real quick, can drones transmit a virus sexually during mating flights to a virgin, healthy queen? I don't know if there's been research done on that. We do know, though, that as bees feed one another, that viruses are definitely transmitted like that, which would make sense to me that if they are feeding a queen, that she can be given viruses through that. And then if she has those copies, and we're talking microscopic stuff, if she has that in her system and has it bad enough, then her offspring, the eggs, are going to already have those copies in the eggs. And so they're already starting out with issues. Now, as far as um, can drones spread that? I think it's quite possible. A lot of viruses spread through, saliva. Drone semen would probably be a viable way to do that. The other issue, though, is if that drone has a decent amount of viruses, is it shooting blanks? And that could really affect. Okay, yeah, the queen got mounted 20 times, but did she actually get mated properly? And so that's and again, early in the season, if we have low mite loads, then our drones are fine. But if we have those outlier colonies that have high mite loads in spring, heaven forbid, then those drones are getting hammered and getting viruses injected in them. And that's again where we've just got to keep them low throughout the season. I think that's where monitoring them is so important. And again, to those who have any issues with sacrificing 300 mites in a alcohol or Dawn dish liquid wash, or sacrificing, no one cares about sacrificing 300 mites. Let me tell you, I don't care about that. Sacrificing 300 bees, um, a healthy colony that has all of the good things working for it can produce 1,500 bees a day, and they're losing up to 1,500 bees a day, 1,000, 1,500 bees a day if they're healthy. So they're already losing those bees. We're taking a little snippet of it, and that really gives us an idea of where we're at. And we have to be responsible beekeepers for our own sake and for our neighbors' sake. Because again, if we have 10 colonies and we've treated them all blindly, but some of them maybe had a huge mite population and we only knocked them back part of the way, we can reinfest our entire yard going into winter with a collapse of one or two colonies. I have seen colonies that literally have had 8,000 or more mites in them in a collapse. And
Wow.
if that gets robbed out, then if I have 20 colonies in that yard or 30 colonies, you'll end up
In
with a
trouble.
lot more collapses, and those bees aren't going through winter very good. Even if they do, they're going to be really sickly. So yeah, I don't know about that drone sharing like that, but wouldn't it surprise me?
Well, I wanted to comment a little bit here. Speaking of viruses and mites, last night's stream team chat that I've gone back and watched some of today with Umberto, he got scientific about the virus's potential to change, like you discussed. And I'm not sure I understand all that, but he talked about how a lot of viruses that are injected into the hemolymph of the bees is it's like I guess it's RNA type viruses that can change very quickly. And so that's one of the
Boy,
issues. The bees have not had a chance really to adapt to those viruses. However, he did mention, if I'm not mistaken, I've only kind of been trying to catch up on that. A lot of the viruses that are passed over the years that bees are very good at managing are the ones that go through their digestive system. Like the bees have become very good at managing a lot of those diseases that go through there. But when it gets in the actual hemolymph of the bees, which is where the mites inject the vector, so to speak, the viruses, it's very difficult for the bees. They haven't caught up yet with that. And so I thought that was really interesting. And that's one reason we're always
Yeah.
chasing those viruses. And if you can keep he said basically the key is to keep the mites low, like what we've been talking about, to keep the viruses, that my understanding of what I interpreted from the whole discussion was keep the mite levels low. And if you do that, you'll have a better chance of keeping the virus levels low, because the viruses are what actually kill the bees.
Mm-hmm.
The mites are just the vectors for those viruses. And so,
And the mites really don't want to kill the bees off, because if they have nowhere else to go, it kills them off too.
well, it's like mosquitoes. I mean, they're not biting us trying to kill us. They just want to suck our blood, but they can inject,
Mhm.
different viruses into the system of humans
I
that
like to
that could
kill
have been.
them though.
Yeah, I like to kill mites. I like to kill mosquitoes, hive beetles, roaches. There's all kinds of
Speaking of
things I like to kill.
speaking of hive beetles, someone asked about having free range chickens and does that affect hive beetles? I really think it does, but you have to have chickens in the yard with the hives. So here at the house, I see them get under the hives, and they will head up under there and they will scratch underneath those hives, and there there's something underneath those hives. I don't know what it is. I assume that some of it is small hive beetles, and it would make sense because small hive beetles pupate very shallow. They don't go, inches deep. I mean, it's from what I understand, it's like that far into the soil. Maybe a little bit deeper in some situations in the harder your soil. I imagine they're more shallow, but the chickens always seem to love going around the hives for whatever reason, and I can't see any other reason for it. The problem is having that in all your bee yards, and that made me think earlier about something I'm going to include in the video. Is we had a great looking colony. I mean, we just added its second deep to it. It's amazing how much further we're behind you up here, um, Bruce. We must be 3 to 4 weeks behind you, I would say. However, and I do run carnies, which is part of the factor too. They definitely are slower to build up than my Italians used to be. That's but we had a good bit. There must have been 100+ beetles, and I popped the lid on that
Oh
colony. Great,
gosh, yeah.
I know. And I'm like, here we go, and it's February when I did that. Well, we had been throwing pollen patties, and they had messed with it, and they did create some larvae. However, in that time of the year when it's getting so cold at night and getting to freezing, they'll die. You can see where the bees kick them out and they freeze on top of the ground or something like that. So I don't really worry about it too much, but that many beetles is a problem. So I had a beetle blaster, and I stuck some mineral oil in it. You can use vegetable oil, whatever. And I placed it in next to the patty, hoping that they would get in there and fall down and drown. You know what? I hardly caught any after a week. I think I had 3 in there. I yanked the patty and removed the food source and came back another week later, and I had almost 30 in there. It was just slightly under. And that's the problem that we face with like trying to trap small hive beetles with pollen patties in. They're more attracted to the food than they are that oil. Somebody someday, maybe it'll be me, is going to create a legal small hive beetle product that the beetles can eat, and they will explode, and just you see one shooting out eye.
Like a Mento.
A Mento. Hey, somebody needs to do it. I'm telling you, it's going to be hard. I experimented with like 20 different of some of the most industrial materials for beetles to stick to. I mean, we're talking stuff that I can't hardly rip off of stuff. And we will take beetles and we'll push them down into it, and they'll be stuck for about 3 or 4 minutes, and they'll find a way to grind out of that and walk on out. And we tried different types of tapes. We tried different types of material that was a little bit more where it was sticky, but also it was more liquid, so they'd kind of have a hard time getting traction. We tried all kinds of things, and you know what? They were always able to find a way out eventually. They're extremely tough to kill, but if someone can invent something that they can stick to, and we could put like an artificial bait in there, like they're attracted to peanut butter, bananas, all kinds of things, and you could have a trap. And I don't think it'd be that hard to get something like that legalized. putting like a poison in there would be difficult because then you're worried about contamination in the colony and bees and all that kind of stuff. But if you had a material like a trap that fit in there and it smelled good like a pollen patty, because they love going after pollen patties, and then you could have something they'd walk into and they just stick to it and they were trapped in there. I think that would be a winner. Somebody needs to come up with something like that, and I am going to give them $1,000 if it works really good. And I mean that
Well,
$1,000.
looks like Michelle has an idea she needs to try there.
Can you add a little sugar to the vegetable oil and maybe attract them into the trap? Possibly. I don't know if they're attracted to sugar so much as they are to stuff that smells fatty and protein, because that's what they're going for. Beetles can't really survive on honey, and they can't survive on sugar syrup, but they bee bread and pollen patties. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, they
It's
love that.
talk about a magnet. So, but
Here's
someone
a
will figure it out.
question for you with the Beatles, and we probably need to wrap. I could talk all night, but we probably need to wrap it up pretty quick. But
Oh wow, we've been
when it
going for
comes,
two and a half
I
hours.
know it's crazy, man. I don't know how it happens. It seems to happen every week with us. We go at least a couple of 3 hours. But as far as the beetles, so they love they're after what they're eating is the pollen, the bee bread, and basically bee bread, right? That's what they're going after. Are they also eating honey, or is that just where they lay their eggs, or where do they lay their eggs? What are they doing in the hive? What's their food source, and where do they lay their eggs? What are the beetles doing in there?
They're wanting to lay their eggs on bee bread and get
Okay.
that high quality nutrition, but they also want to lay their eggs around brood because brood is also extremely nutritious.
Mhm.
And so that's what they go for. So when we did the video on I don't know if anyone watched the video on the uncapping knife from Pierce, that I did a video on, and also their uncapping tank. But that honey was stored in my honey house. It was very dry in there, and all those frames were nothing but honey. I mean, I held them up to the light. There's no bee bread down in there whatsoever. And you know what? I didn't have any slimy beetle issues, and that's very normal. If you Where they typically slime out your boxes and your honey house is one if it's really humid, but more often than not, it's because they found a pocket, even if it's under some honey. Because what bees will do is they'll fill cells with bee bread, and then in a time of year with excess, they will pack it over the top with honey to help preserve that even longer. And the beetles can probably smell that or sense it. I don't know, but they can tunnel down in there, and especially if it's open bee bread, they will lay their eggs around that and go up and go all over that stuff. But they're all about the proteins and fats,
Okay.
and as far as the honey storage, I didn't do anything to freeze that or anything. I just had it
So
sitting
when
there.
you so when I open up a dead out, or even a hive that's on its way out and it's got slime everywhere, the slime comes from the honey, obviously, right? What causes that? What
Well,
causes the slime and the yellow, nasty, stinky, gross, but
oh
just
yeah. Well,
miserable experience of cleaning up the slime out?
they actually secrete a yeast slime. The larvae do. So it's I don't I imagine yeast typically has protein, so I actually imagine that it's not coming from the honey. I don't know this for a fact. I'm imagining this is coming from the protein, whether it's coming from eating brood or eating bee bread or pollen patties, and then they're secreting this yeast and spreading that all over the place. And bees detest that stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
If there's a
no
little bit
doubt.
of it, I mean, even like a surface area about that big on a frame, they will walk
Ugh.
around that thing. They're not going to touch it. And that's the problem though, is the more time they give that location to fester, the bigger the larvae get and the more of them hatch and emerge, and then just keep spreading and spreading and spreading. So once it gets started, it can become a problem. The best thing to do is to always have a good population of bees to guard every corner of the hive. And yeah, so I hate small hive
Yeah,
beetles, man.
I hate. Uh, yeah, me too. We are dealing with problems. We've talked about a lot of things tonight that everybody. I really thought this was a good idea and a good time and good timing to do this, because I know that people are getting excited about spring. People are wanting to know what to do, and obviously it's regional. I think hopefully people understand that. Like if you see me doing stuff on my videos, in February, there are people up in the north that are just barely starting to peek into their colonies, and some that haven't even done that yet.
Sure.
And so it's just so regional. So fine, the bee principles, I believe bee principles apply everywhere. The life cycle, the way bees operate, what they do is consistent across the board, but the management is going to vary greatly depending on what your goals are
Mm.
and where you live. And even like you said, a few miles apart, 7, 8 yards apart can be different from, it's just crazy here where I'm at. Some of my bee yards are a few miles from others, and it's just different. Like they'll be bringing in honey and nectar in one bee yard, and the other one won't have started yet because of what's around there. And so it's just a challenge, and that's part of the beauty of it. But
And that's
I, I
I was just going to say, and that's why we talk about these complicated issues. It's not to discourage anybody. It's just to encourage everybody to really do your best to have combinations going in a positive way for your bees, because we have all these things going against them. Most of these things haven't been here except since about the 80s, really. Um, so they're still relatively new, and we're just starting to catch up. And I think beekeepers are communicating now. And you know me, I'm a positive guy. I think now's an exciting time to get into bees, but it's going to take a lot of determination. And I think we're also it's harder to manage as many bees as it used to as well. So as beekeepers, we're gonna have to be a little bit more creative in marketing our products, so we can get more with less. And whether that's selling premium priced honey or whatever. So,
yeah, I
or
agree.
putting roll tide on each bottle and being able to get a premium, unless they're Auburn fans.
Yeah. Hey, listen. Speaking of that, my daughter's going to be going to Auburn in the fall. So,
Are you serious?
yeah. But anyway,
You
that's okay.
try. Auburn's a really good university.
It really is.
As much as I pick on Auburn, my uncle went to Auburn and graduated there in an agricultural degree, and they have a lot of cool ag degrees, and they have a great beekeeping program too. That's one thing we need to talk to Nick Saban about. Next time I'm on the phone with Nick Saban, I want to talk to him about putting a bee program there a little bit bigger at the Crimson Tide.
Yeah,
Roll
it's
bees, roll.
the two schools just have different goals. They're doing
Yeah, they
different
do.
things, and it's just fun to have that rivalry, and it's just that way across the board with with all the different universities have their own reasons for existence, and so we have fun. We have favorite teams, but really every university, I think, for the most part, is trying to accomplish certain things, and so.
Auburn is pretty awesome. In a lot of ways. Besides their football program, oh, that stinks.
They've got a really good. Actually, they've got a really good B program up there, I believe, and so they've.
The research that I was talking to you with Bob, that part of that was held there at the University of Auburn.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Georgia and Auburn were doing that together, I believe, and I
yeah,
think they've actually sent Auburn and maybe Georgia. I think Auburn sent some researchers down here looking into some of the commercial and people around here and just doing some testing on maybe some of the things Bob was talking about with the researchers. That may have been part of that study. I'm not sure, but I know Auburn University is always trying to do some research on things, a lot of
mm-hmm.
might type stuff. But we probably need to shut it down pretty quick. Cayman, I did want to bring in, I'm going to call him my troll thumper here real quick and just tell him thank you if that's okay.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We got
Yeah, it
Brian
does look
here.
like a troll.
Brian's got his troll thumper. But guys,
Okay.
everybody, Brian
Hey,
has
Brian.
Brian
Good
has
to
been
see
in the
you.
background this whole time. He's been kind of helping manage this chat. He's been, and I just appreciate you, Brian. Brian is he's a technology guy. He does technology for a living, and so I just wanted to bring on Brian and just recognize you tonight and say thank you for helping out.
Not a problem.
Cayman, you
Awesome
got any words of wisdom, Cayman, for us before we close this thing out?
Great queens, dead mites, and good nutrition.
That's right.
That's
Well,
it.
everybody, I think we're going to close it out. I appreciate everyone for watching. And I appreciate Brian, you and all the others who may have helped moderate this chat tonight. And Cayman, it's been really good. Some valuable information. And I've learned some things tonight that hopefully will help me and everyone else out there. So I'm going to say this like I do all my videos. Y'all take care, be safe, and we'll catch you on the next one.